शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिणि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिणि शङ्करतोषिणि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनि रोषिनि दितिसुतरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते
Oh, hi guys. Thank you for joining the live stream. Let me know if the audio is coming fine. Yeah. So, hello, Professor Salvatore Babones. It's an honor to have you. Thank you very much for joining our live stream. Nino Jashiram. Hi, RS. Hi, Nanad Vaya. So, today, something fascinating happened. First of all, let me give you a basic outline of what we are going to discuss. Two papers, okay? One, a 9-page paper, which is the first paper we are going to discuss by someone called Jacob Pandian, who used to be, I don't know if he's alive or not. He used to be in California State University, Fullerton campus. This is the first paper we are going to discuss, which, according to mystery sociologist who sent me these two papers, this kind of argues that how caste titles did not really matter for Tamil Brahmins and has not mattered. This paper is from 1983. This is the paper we're going to discuss first. This is called Political Emblems of Caste Identity and Interpretation of Tamil Caste Titles. So if you all can get hold of the paper, you all can read it along with me. Now, the other paper we are going to discuss is this. Okay, this is about how the Labbai Muslim caste, which basically works as a caste now, worked or was developed without any relevance or basically without anything to do with Hinduism or Hindu caste system or Hindu Jati Varna system. Okay, so because it's sort of a counter to those people who say that Muslims and Christians also ended up having caste systems in India because of Hindu caste system. This paper, at least in the context of Labbai Muslims of the Pulicat area of South India, at least they have nothing to do with Hindu caste system, and he proves it. Jacob Pandian proves this. Okay. Now, the funny thing that happened is, right before I was starting this live stream and making the thumbnail and all, I was going through the paper and reading the conclusion abstract of that paper, okay, the Labbai Muslim paper. So now Mr. Sociologist sent this paper to me about 1 or 2 weeks back, and he told me what's it about. So when I went through the conclusion, I was coming to a different conclusion, and I could not get hold of him at that very moment, Mr. Sociologist. I was calling him up to confirm that, does this really argue what you were saying? Because I'm coming to a different conclusion. Am I getting something wrong? So he was not picking up my call. And then my famous AI scientist friend, he recommends that ask Google Gemini, okay, the AI thing of Google, okay. And they give the exact same gist and conclusion that Mr. Sociologist was giving. So I was very, very much blown away that what did I miss that they got right? Okay. Then he showed, my AI scientist friend showed that it's actually it was co-founded or co-created by a Bengali as well. A Bengali was there in the team, one of the key people. His name is Shoham De. So that was fun. It's an Indian caste system. Yes, Salvatore Babones. I had to unsubscribe and then subscribe to get notification. Lol. Yeah, ye to hona hi hai. So good evening, people. Let's start this. Now, this paper is going to show how Tamil Brahmins were apparently or are apparently kind of powerless regardless of their caste title. Okay. So, political emblems of caste identity and interpretation of Tamil caste titles. And I will take notes so that I can write down the key takeaways later on in the comment section. J. Pandian, California State University, Fullerton. This paper examines the structure and function of Tamil caste titles, interpreting them as political emblems of caste identity. Political emblems. It is suggested that these political emblems represent the reality of corporate authority and politico-economic dominance, and that it is necessary to study these emblems in their own right as distinctive dimensions of caste identity rather than to subsume them under the caste names or varna categories, which are not political but ritual emblems of caste identity. A general review of Tamil caste titles and an analysis of 3 Tamil caste titles are undertaken, which we had kind of discussed a few months back, where I think Madam Political Scientist pointed out that you can't retrospectively force fit jati identities into different varna names. Okay, that just doesn't work. So J. Pandian writes, researchers in India are well aware of the fact that if a person is asked a question about his caste identity, he may give one of the several replies. One, he might say his caste name, which is not shared by other castes, but may be shared by the subcastes of his caste. And 2, his caste titles, which may be shared by other castes and which could also be the caste name of some other caste. 3, he might say the Varna category, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, within which he includes his caste. Occasionally, as Dumont has pointed out, an individual may identify his clan as the caste. Okay. Quote from Dumont, if one asks someone what is your caste or jati, he may indicate either which of the 4 Varna he belongs to, or a caste title, or his caste, or his subcaste, or even the exogamous section or clan to which he belongs. End quote. There is much confusion and ambiguity among scholars and among Tamils themselves in several points. Many castes of the same region share the same or different caste titles and Varna labels. Scholars disagree as to whether the titles are regional analogues or versions of the All India Varna categories. It has been debated whether the use of titles is indicative of the existence of large non-endogamous units such as the castes or subcastes. The confusion is complicated by the fact that caste titles of some castes are also caste names of other groups, and that the caste titles occasionally correspond to Varna categories. So important here, occasionally correspond to Varna categories. I suggest that the confusion in the literature on caste may be cleared up if we realize that from the user's perspective, the conception of caste identity is not unidimensional. Caste identity is conceptualized with denotative and connotative symbols that have multiple reference and are multivocal. Therefore, a symbol which in a certain context means or represents religious or ritual status, in other context might represent political, economic, or kinship status. There are, however, certain symbols of caste identity, but remember status, okay? There are, however, certain symbols of caste identity which we can identify as rooted in political and or economic authority, and others are rooted in sacred or ritual authority. In the anthropological study of caste, scholars generally neglect to investigate how the structure of caste titles relates to village corporate authority and politico-economic dominance or power. Caste titles are generally seen either as pretentious labels claimed by ritually low-ranking castes in their efforts toward upward mobility, 1983's paper, okay, or as regional analogues of the Varna hierarchy used throughout India. Although it is true that we can find a few examples to support these views, a closer study would indicate that the underlying structure of caste titles is related or linked to the concepts of authority and power and not to ritual status, mobility, or Varna hierarchy. In other words, there are 2 structures that generate symbols of caste identity. 1, the political structure or the reality of corporate authority and politico-economic dominance is represented in caste titles, which thus serve as political emblems. Thus, number 2, the ritual structure is manifested in caste names or Varna categories, which thus serve as ritual emblems. The political and ritual aspects exist in a dialectical relationship. Both are necessary for an individual to conceptualize his caste identity. So this is what happens when state sanctions and doesn't sanction some kind of status groups. In some instances, the 2 are in close interplay, as when a single term serves as both caste name and title and thus acts as both as a political and a ritual emblem. In other instances, the interplay is limited, as when some caste groups self-consciously distinguish their caste names and caste titles. But no matter how close the interplay, the political structure of caste identity is distinguishable from and cannot be subsumed under the ritual structure of caste identity. Betil in 1965, who studied a village in central Tamil Nadu, found the use of caste titles confusing, but concluded that caste titles, which he viewed as caste surnames, were local analogues of all India Varna categories. He notes, quote, the Kallas of Sripuram have adopted the title Sarvai, and most of them give Sarvai as the name of their caste, although some retain the old caste name Kalla. Sarvai or Sarvaikaran, Sarvaikaran is again a title adopted by members of other castes as well. For example, Ahmudia or Marwa. Similarly, the term Muppan or Muppanar figures as a title among people with diverse caste affiliations. For example, Odayars and Marwas. And some people also declare Muppan to be the caste name, to be the name of their caste. Again, Pandaram represents an occupation, a title, and also the name of the caste or subcaste. This is from Betil's work in 1965. There are innumerable references to the caste titles in ethnographies of Tamil Nadu villages and regions. In the report of the Backward Classes Commission of Tamil Nadu, 1971, it is recorded that 79 different caste titles are used by the agricultural castes of northern Tamil Nadu alone. The most commonly used titles in northern Tamil Nadu are Padayachi, Nayakkar, Reddiyar, Muppanar and Gondar. Thurston in 1909 makes several references to the occurrence of caste titles in Tamil Nadu. And in his discussion of a particular caste, he observes that, quote, it is noted in the Salem manual that some of the agricultural classes habitually append the title Gondan as a sort of caste nomenclature after their names, but the word applies par excellence to the head of the village, or Urgondan as he is called. As examples of castes which take Gondan as their title, the Pallis, Okkilians and Vellalas may be cited. This is from Thurston's work in 1909. Now, Thurston's reference to the Salem manual concerning the caste title Gondan, that it applies par excellence to the head of the village, or Urgondan as he is called, is a key to the understanding of the structure and meaning of caste titles in Tamil Nadu. It suggests that caste titles represent concepts of political power and or authority, as the concepts are understood in the village or region. The titles have the potential to become caste names and also frequently get incorporated in the Kshatriya or Vaishya Varna category. The transformation of caste titles into caste names or Varna categories is accomplished through the deployment of sacerdotal authority. Okay, sacerdotal authority means an authority who performs those sacrifices and stuff. Okay, so the transformation of caste titles into caste names or Varna categories is accomplished through the deployment of sacerdotal authority, rendering the caste title into a religious category. This often occurs in the context of caste mobility, where status emulation is conceptualized in ritual or religious terms. Rowe has written that, quote, name changing is of at least three types. Some castes choose the name of a known higher caste. Others choose to append the name of a Varna higher than their own after the usual caste appellation. In this way, the Kurmis, who are the Shudra cultivators, petition to have their name changed to Kurmi Kshatriya, or the Saini caste claims the title of Saini Kshatriya. Still, another type of petition urges a change from a functional Shudra caste name such as Teli, oil manufacturers and vendors, to Vaishya, the Varna of traders, not a caste name at all. This is what has been pointed out in Hitesh Ranjan Shanal's paper, which we discussed in a live stream called How to Buy Your Caste, where we found that as an example of gigantic amounts of caste mobility in some villages of Bengal, as per specifically Hitesh Ranjan Shanal's result, different Brahmins went around creating fake genealogies and basically attesting and sanctioning, like today's IAS Babus, anyone who paid them and went and tried going up a class higher in some caste ranking. Okay, so in some villages Telis are higher than Tilis, in some villages Tilis are higher than Telis, and in some villages Telis and Tilis are absolutely similar, absolutely the same caste even. Okay, so an individual may use one or more caste labels, his caste name, caste title and or Varna category, to denote his caste identity. Unless an observer is familiar with the village and regional culture, it is not possible to know whether the labels signify ritual status or politico-economic dominance. Right. The labels do not explicitly signify the difference in meaning, but must be related to the meanings and definitions of the situations where they are deployed. Fair enough. And actually, well said. In addition, there are differences in the use of the labels as terms of address or reference. Also, as Mandelbaum in 1972 points out, quote, the answer a villager gives to the question, who are you, depends as it does everywhere in the world, on who is asking and on what the villager thinks the questioner wants or should know. Exactly. Like how people in Bangladesh, Hindu protesters in Bangladesh and some people in West Bengal refuse to say when you ask them, who are you, how old are you, what college do you go to, what subject are you studying, they refuse to answer because they know that those informations will be used to mark them, to hunt them down, and then probably have bad things done to them. So I suggest, Jacob Pandian writes, I suggest that it is incorrect to view the caste titles as regional expressions of Varna hierarchy. Okay, let me write this down as the first keynote. Caste titles are not regional expressions of Varna hierarchy. Whereas some caste titles may correspond to some degree to the All India Varna hierarchical categories. The titles as a whole are not structural or functional counterparts of Varna, and there is no necessary link between how the titles and Varna categories are conceptualized. Look. So we could almost, would it be too much of a stretch to write down as a keynote, as a key takeaway, that there is almost no link between between caste and Varna? It would be a stretch, but let's be cocky. It's almost like that. Link between how the titles and Varna categories are conceptualized. The objective of this paper is to examine the structure of Tamil caste titles or pattam to determine if it is valid to interpret the titles as political emblems of caste identity, reflecting village corporate authority and politico-economic dominance or power. In the following section, I use 3 examples to illustrate the distinction between political emblems versus ritual emblems. Now, discussion of 3 caste labels. The 3 caste labels, Chettiar, Nadar and Mudaliar, are used as both caste names and caste titles. The contrasting usages of these labels provides us with examples of how the same labels acquire meanings of either ritual purity or corporate authority and power. The label Chettiar is the caste name of a few castes located primarily in northern and central Tamil Nadu. These castes are ranked high in the ritual hierarchy because they engage in occupations which are ritually non-defiling. On the other hand, a few ritually low-ranking castes use the label as a caste title. To these castes, the label represents corporate authority and power, and the title is not conceptually linked with ritual status. The label Nadar was originally a caste title of a particular caste named Shanar of southern Tamil Nadu. The label was used as a caste name by the upper class Shanar or Shanar before the 19th century, but with a general economic and educational transformation and advancement of the caste in the 19th century, the label Nadar became the caste name of the entire caste. The label of Mudaliar has a wide distribution throughout Tamil Nadu, but occurs mostly in the northern and central regions. This paper is from 1983, by the way, okay? It is used as a caste name with a high ritual status and as a caste title to represent non-ritual power and authority. Right. It is used as a, जब caste name के तौर पे use हो रहा है, then it's a high ritual status, and when it's a caste title, then it's used as a non-ritual power and authority. So caste name and caste titles are different, so complex. In some regions, and so I think the more a society advances, the longer a civilization is, the complexer and further complex it gets, which shows how long the history of our civilization is. In some regions and contexts, the label has a derogatory meaning, which implies mixed parentage, quote unquote, or children of temple dancers, etc. But it is also one of the most valued names and titles at the same time. In, in my discussion of these three labels, I will focus on what I believe to be the central facts associated with them. In discussing the labels of Chettiar, I will show how a label is used to represent corporate authority and power in a village. Commentary on the label Nadar will show how corporate authority and power is transformed into ritual status. An examination of the label Mudaliar will show that when a label is used as a title in a non-village context, the meaning of corporate authority and power carried by the label is confused with caste name. Chettiar, during my now first discussion is on Chettiar. During my fieldwork in 1970 through 1971 in a village of northern Tamil Nadu, I found that the three most popular caste titles were Mudaliar, capitalist, Nayakkar, chieftain, and Chettiar, trader. Mudaliar used as a prestigious title by a number of caste groups throughout the Tamil country, was adopted by a caste of fishermen named Kadaiyar, as well as by a weaver caste named Kaikolar. The title Nayakkar was used by a cultivating caste, Vanyar, and by the herdsman caste called Idaya or Idaya. I'm not sure what the pronunciation is. So see already what confusion is going on. There were 5 castes with the label Chettiar. The label had the meaning of caste name as used by 2 trading castes called Bedi Chettiar and Vaduvu Chettiar. It had the meaning of caste title as used by 2 castes of weavers named Padma Saliar and Pattu Saliar, and by a fisherman caste called Pattanavar. The 2 trading castes, the Bedi Chettiar and the Vaduvu Chettiar, which use the label as their caste name, they distinguish themselves with the prefixes Vaduvu, meaning northern or Telugu speaking, and Bedi, meaning southern or Tamil speaking. About the history of Bedi Chettiar, Thurston notes, quote, with regard to their origin, the Kanyaka Purana states that a certain king wanted to marry a beautiful maiden of the Komati caste. When the Komatis declined to agree to the match, the king began to persecute them, and those Komati who left the country out of fear were called Bedi or Bedari, meaning fear Chettis. Okay, the story is in fact similar to that told by Nattukottai Chettis, and the legend no doubt refers to persecution of some king whose extortion went beyond the limits of custom. Another derivation of the word Bedi is from Perumai, greatness of or splendor. This is from Thurston work in 1909. Now, about the use of caste name and caste title Chettiar, Thurston has this to say, quote, it is noted in the census report 1891 that the name Chetti is used both to denote a distinct caste and also a title. And people bearing this title describe themselves loosely as belonging to the Chetti caste, in the same way as a Vellala will say that he is a Mudali. This use of Chetti has caused some confusion in the returns, for the subdivisions show that many other castes have been included as well as Chetti proper. Again, in the census report of 1901, it is recorded that Chetti means trader and is one of those titular or occupation terms which are often loosely employed as caste names. The weavers, oil pressers, and others use it as a title, and many more tack it on to their names to denote that trade is their occupations. End quote. In the village I studied, the Bedi Chettiar monopolized sale of rice, grocery, and textiles, and this village was a large coastal village with several satellite hamlets inhabited by Pattanavar fishermen. There were several service and trading castes. The Bedi Chettiar were the wealthy group and gave financial credit to clients from several different groups. The credit provided by the Bedi Chettiar to other castes was pivotal to the functioning of the village social system. In the lean seasons of fishing, जो कि off season है, the fishing and other castes borrowed money from the Bedi Chettiar to ward off starvation. As creditors, the Bedi Chettiar functioned as quote-unquote patrons in relation to other castes, who functioned as quote-unquote clients in the credit structure, which enabled the survival of all castes. In relation, and remember, castes function like guilds and employee associations. In relation to the उस context में देखो, उस lens से देखो. In relation to the other castes, the Bedi Chettiar had greater wealth and also greater political power, although indirectly through clients. The ritual status of Bedi Chettiar was the highest among the non-Brahmins. The label Chettiar was the accepted caste name for the Bedi Chettiar, And when the label Chettiar was used to address a Bedi Chettiar, it denoted political power and authority as well as the ritual status of Bedi Chettiar. As mentioned earlier, the label Chettiar was used as caste title by 3 castes in the village. Among these castes, the Pattanavar fishermen were numerically preponderant and also as a group through fishing brought more money into circulation in the village than the other castes. In one sense, the Pattanavar were also quote unquote patrons as they owned the sea from which they generated occupation, from which they generated wealth, the sea. Thus, the Pattanavar had politico-economic power, but their ritual status was low because they engaged in a ritually defiling occupation. Okay, this is interesting. Pattanavar had politico-economic power, but their ritual status was still low. Let me do this as a key takeaway. These are, of course, for the time being, because if this went on for a few more decades, they would also gain ritual power. Low ritual status because of quote unquote low defiling profession, or defiling profession of whose let's say the products created by that quote unquote low defiling population. Nobody has a problem with that. Concerning the Pattanavar, concerning the Pattanavar, Thurston states that some Pattanavans give themselves high-sounding caste titles. For example, Ayyar, Ayyar Thalaivar, Aryanattu Chetti. Some Pattanavans have adopted the title Pillai. In the village I studied and in the surrounding villages, Chettiar was the most important caste title. The label of Chettiar as a title conveyed the meaning of corporate authority and politico-economic power as it was conceptualized in the village. It had nothing to do with ritual purity or pollution and the rank in the Varna hierarchy. The label of Chettiar for the Pattanavar was a political emblem. It was used within the caste and also in interactions among different castes by the Pattanava when it was necessary to convey the meaning of corporate authority and politico-economic dominance or power. The Pattanavar headmen of the different villages were identified as Ur, meaning village, Ur Chettiar. So village Chettiar. Some villages had assistant headmen, and in those instances, the headman was called Periya, meaning big Chettiar, Periya Chettiar, meaning big Chettiar, and the assistant headman was called Chinna Chettiar, meaning small Chettiar. So Chinna Swami means small Swami or what? The two other castes that had the title Chettiar, Padmasaliyar and Pattusaliyar, were not politico-economically dominant in the village, but because their traditional occupation was weaving, they had a higher ritual status than the Pattanavar. So weaving had gained a sort of a higher ritual status. How? This is where our argument lies, that any ritual conceptions of high status, low status, or purity pollution is always preceded by the economic importance of that profession. We stand vindicated again. So after the British initiated changes in the weaving industry in the 19th century, weaver castes became impoverished. It is conceivable that the Saliyar castes had politico-economic power at an earlier period, and the title Chettiar was part of their historical heritage. At the time of my study, only the elders of these castes were addressed by the title Chettiar, and the use of titles did not denote politico-economic power and corporate authority. See, economic disruption आ गया, governmental intervention, थोड़ा shock लग गया system में, and the existing caste system fails again, falters. Political economic power and the corporate authority. The Nadar. Okay, let me have a sip of green tea now. The Nadar. The label Nadar is both a caste name and caste title. In the 20th century, the label acquired significance as a caste name, replacing the caste name called Shanar or Shanar or Shanar. I don't know how to pronounce it. Along with this transformation, the ritually defiling caste occupation of collecting palm juice for making sugar, ये भी ritually defiling है, and intoxicating beverages, अच्छा, became a relatively unimportant activity confined to only the poorest members of the caste. In the modern context, due to the numerical preponderance of the Nadar, estimated to be from 2 to 4 million, and the economic and educational advancement which began in the 19th century, the caste has a relatively high ritual, political, economic, and social position in Tamil Nadu. As been pointed out by Thurston in 1909, Hartgrave in 1969, Rudolph and Rudolph in 1967. The label Nadar is derived from the caste title Nadan, which was traditionally used as a caste name by the upper class members of the Shanar caste. The word Nadan or Nadan means, okay, so not Nadan. Nadan means landlord or ruler of the country. In the southeastern tip of Tamil Nadu, the very hot, humid, and sandy region where the main vegetation was palm trees, and in the tropical southwestern tip of Tamil Nadu, where most of the Shanar lived, upper class Shanar owned the land where palm trees were cultivated for tapping the juice to make sugar and intoxicating beverages. In these areas, the upper class Shanar, that is the Nadans, distinguished themselves from the labor class of Shanars, identified as the climber of palm trees, who were dependent on the Nadans for their livelihood, क्योंकि उन लोगों को ही चढ़ के वो उतारना है पेड़ से. The Nadan landlords were recognized traditionally as the retainers or tax collectors by the rulers of the quote-unquote deep south of southern India, which today constitutes the two southern districts of Tamil Nadu. Many of the villages of the deep south were composed entirely or almost entirely of Shanars who had their own caste of barbers and priests. Within these villages, the high ritual and social status and the politico-economic power of the Nadan were never disputed. The class division cut across all the subcastes of the Shanar caste. Interesting. The caste of Shanar as a whole was divided into 5 subcastes, each with several clans, and the clan temples were dedicated to Kali Amman, who was worshipped as the guardian of the Shanars. This is pointed out by Hartgrave Jr. in 1969. In the villages and towns where Shanars did not constitute the majority, with no Nadan landlords, Shanars had a low ritual status and were ranked just above the untouchables. Their occupation was considered ritually polluting, and therefore they were prohibited from worshipping in the temples where Brahmin priests officiated. In parts of the deep south, as in the old kingdom of Travancore, Shanars were subject to forced labor or a kind of semi-serfdom and were prohibited from wearing upper garments. Pointed out by Hartgrave Jr. in 1969. The transition from a caste of relatively low ritual status to a caste of high ritual status and the transformation of caste name from Shanar to Nadar have become documented in great detail in the missionary court and government documents of the 19th century. Also pointed out in Hartgrave Jr.'s work in 1969, Rudolph and Rudolph's work in 1967. A large number of Shanar became Christians in the 19th century, and many of them became professionals, merchants, and overseas traders, but their ritual status was linked with traditional, ritually defiling occupations of making intoxicating beverages. Thus, despite their economic advancement, they were still not considered by the other castes to be a high caste, which is probably the reason why the Ghoti Shahas, which is the Shaha Vaishya Varna people of Bengal who were not victims of partition, who were traditionally alcohol sellers, we call them Shuri Shahas. They probably have the scheduled caste certificate because of this very reason, that they were in a ritually defiling profession. About the caste titles of the Shanar, Thurston notes, quote, some Tamil traders who returned themselves as Pandian were classified as Shanars as Nadan was entered in their title. In Coimbatore, some Shanans engaged as shopkeepers have been known to adopt the name of Chetti. In Coimbatore too, the title Muppan occurs. This title, meaning headman or elder, is also used by other castes. Pointed out by Thurston in 1909. In the 19th century, Rudra Bose, yes, I am Shaha, but I am Bangal Shaha. I am not SC Shaha. Even though my ancestors faced partition and were poorer than alcohol selling Shahas. In the 19th century, there was a self-conscious organized effort to unify all the Shanars, to affirm Nadar as the caste name and to include the caste in the Kshatriya Varna category. Lo, Shanar, to isko attestate kaun karega? Shanar caste historians claimed that Shanars were the descendants of the ancient Tamil ruling dynasties, and that the name Shanar was derived from the word Shantror, meaning nobility. Also, it was claimed that the caste title Nadan was indicative of kingship, as the heritage of the Shanar caste. Bishop Caldwell, one of the 19th century Christian missionaries who wrote extensively about the Shanar, theorized that the Shanars and the other toddy tappers of South India had migrated from Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and pointed out that the label Shanar was in fact an honored caste title of the makers of intoxicant drinks in the Kerala state, such as the Eravas, pointed out by Hardgrave Jr. in 1969. The social mobility movement of the 19th century was resisted by the Marwar caste of the southeast and the Nayar caste of the southwest. For about 50 years, both the Marwar and the Nayar attempted to intimidate the Shanar with arson, assault, and murder. The Shanar, in presenting their claims for a higher ritual status, pointed out that their persecution by the Marwar, which is the warrior caste of the southeast, and the Nayar, warrior caste of the southwest, was itself proof that the Shanar were a conquered race of early Tamil royalty. In the 20th century, the Shanar ceased to have their caste included in the Kshatriya category. But by then, their claims for a higher ritual status had gained implicit acceptance and recognition. हो गया, acceptance हो गया, और क्या चाहिए? यही तो है एक ऑटोमेटिव ऑटोपायलट सेल्फ रिफॉर्मिंग सोसाइटी इंडिया का, हिंदुइज्म का. So, but by then, their claims for a higher ritual status had gained implicit acceptance and recognition, and the political and social changes that had occurred in the 20th century throughout India had made it irrelevant whether they were known as Kshatriya or not, pointed out by Rudolph and Rudolph in 1967. But the label Nadar became important as a caste name, and the label Shanar was viewed as a derogatory term of reference and address. The example of the Nadar shows how the title Nadan, a symbol of village corporate authority and politico-economic dominance and power, became the label of caste identity, and how the caste mobilization and regionalization of politico-economic dominance, ठीक है, regionalization of politico-economic dominance, कि तुम्हारा politico-economic dominance सिर्फ इस region में है, तो वो conversation, वो discourse, तो how the caste mobilization and regionalization of politico-economic dominance and power enabled all the members of the caste within the label of Nadar to be incorporated by the label. The existence of the Nadan upper class did not result in a permanent fission of the caste, but through the efforts of this class, the entire group was elevated to participate in the politico-economic dominance and power under the caste label Nadar. Now, the case for Mudaliar castes. Let me have a sip of green tea now. I want to respond to something Nitin is saying here. Nitin is saying that while all men are born as equals, to say that Brahmins alone are the highest and all others are low as untouchables is sheer nonsense. It is roguish to say so. It is a big hoax to play on us. Nitin, I half agree with you, half disagree with you. So, dekho, first of all, morally, of course, we could argue that everyone is born equal. That yes, everyone, at least most people have two hands, physical characteristics, etc. But everyone is not born with similar qualities of physical health, nor similar qualities of brain power, IQ, etc., which also depends on the physical health of their ancestors, their parentage, etc. Nor is everyone brought up with similar kinds of child nutrition, which also affects their overall intelligence, IQ, etc. So born as equals, how much that is a 100% correct thing to say, I'm not sure. But legally speaking, obviously, that is how law should work. But you see, even if today, in every civilized country, law treats everyone as equals, it does not really work that way, right? Someone's opinion matters more. Okay. So why do I have, let's say, 400 views on an average on my streams discussing sociology, but someone with a PhD and a doctor in their name, in their YouTube channel, why will they have more views? Or why do they get to teach a class every day for decades and decades with more students in their classes? Okay, why is that? What's the difference between him and myself? Something, right? It's his credentials, and that credential proves the fact that he has quite possibly studied more on this subject. So their views, when their opinions matter more than someone else, immediately the context, the terminologies of equality get destroyed. So if Brahmins knew more about stuff, when the things that Brahmins knew were important in society, so obviously it's very obvious that Brahmins would get more respect and would get considered more important than everyone else. Just like today, PhDs, IAS, babus, lawyers, judges, they are considered more important than everybody else. They have more privileges than all of us. So you are half right, half wrong. Now the Mudaliar caste. Varadaraj and Mudaliar. So the term Mudaliar means capitalist. It is used both as a caste name and caste title. Concerning the label Mudaliar, Thurston states the title Mudali is this Mudali also sometimes pronounced as, I mean, is this the same as Mudali? Because D often gets pronounced as R. No, I don't know. Is Mudaliar and Mudaliar then same, or is this Mudali the same as Mudali? Someone let me know. So the title Mudali is used chiefly by the offspring of Devdasi's temple dancers, Kailkolans and Vellalas. The Vellalas generally take the title Mudali in the northern and Pillai in the southern districts. By some Vellalas, Mudali is considered discourteous, as it is also the title of weavers. Mudali further occurs as a title of Jains, Gabadas or Gabadas, or Okkans or Ochans, Pallis or Vanyans, and the Panisavans. Some Pattanavans, I'm probably pronouncing all of these wrong. Some Pattanavans style themselves Varunakala, pointed out by Thurston in 1909. Devdasis, yeah. Nitin has a problem with the idea of Devdasi, but remember, Greek temples of Apollo, they also had young women who would forever spend their lifetimes serving Apollo. Okay, have you watched the Brad Pitt movie Troy? Who was Brad Pitt trying to date? Okay, the brother of Orlando Bloom. I mean, the sister of Orlando Bloom. She was basically a Devdasi in the temple of Apollo. So you see, these things happen everywhere. So of course, we can have a debate on whether it's an evil profession or not. We can argue that yeah, it was evil forever, or we can argue that yes, it had some relevance in some time periods. But what you can't argue is that it was a distinctively Indian or Hindu problem. That's all I'm saying. In the village of Pulicat in northern Tamil Nadu, the label Mudaliar was used as a caste name by three groups: Sengunthan Mudaliar, Ponneri Mudaliar, and Kadaikadu Mudaliar. The prefixes Senguntham, Ponneri, and Kadaikadu identified them as subcastes of the caste Mudaliar. All three had high ritual status, although they were not powerful or dominant politico-economically in the village. High ritual status नहीं है, तब कोई powerful और politically dominant है. Okay, politico-economically dominant है. और कोई low ritual status में है, मगर फिर भी politico-economically dominant है and powerful है. यही है main crux of this paper, at least, which is why I've called the live stream Powerless Tamil Brahmins. The label Mudaliar was used as a caste title by the weaver caste named Kaikolar and a fishing caste named Karaiyar. As the Mudaliar caste has several subcastes, and as the label Mudaliar is used as a title by several castes that differ greatly in their ritual status, it is essential that the users and observers of the label understand what the label Mudaliar represents to them. A lack of such an understanding can result in confusion and conflict. To illustrate the foregoing statement, I will briefly summarize in the following paragraph an encounter between a representative of the caste group called Tuluva Vellada caste name, which uses Mudaliar as one of the caste titles, and a census commissioner of the government of Tamil Nadu who attempts to find out the relationship between Vellala, Ahemudaya and Mudaliar castes, quote unquote castes. Okay. Tuluva has something to do with Tulunadu, right? The Kantara stories. So this is from the report of the Backward Classes Commission of Tamil Nadu, 1971. The census commissioner of the government of Tamil Nadu and the representative of the Tuluva Vellala caste could not agree upon whether the label Mudaliar, which is used by the Tuluva Vellala caste, denoted caste title or caste name. This was further complicated by the fact that it was not uncommon to refer to the Tuluva Vellala caste as the Ahamudayan caste or Ahamudaya caste, and the label Ahamudayan was often used as a caste name in southern Tamil Nadu. The representative of the Tuluva Vellala caste indicated that the Tuluva Vellala caste had the caste title of Mudaliar in the northern part of Tamil Nadu and had the caste title Pillai in some other regions, reflecting the use of caste titles in the different regions. The dialogue between the census commissioner and the caste representative clearly demonstrates that there was confusion in the identification of the denotation and connotation of caste labels, not only among the researchers on caste, but also among the caste members themselves. Caste member को खुद confusion है. When members of a caste group are dispersed in different regions, the caste titles added to the caste names reflect the nomenclature of political authority prevalent in a given region. The label Mudaliar has wider currency as a title and as a name in northern Tamil Nadu. As pointed out earlier, it is necessary to distinguish between several subcastes with the caste name Mudaliar, usually used to identify their distinctiveness with reference to locality, and several non-Mudaliar castes that use the label Mudaliar as one of their caste titles. Furthermore, several castes who use the title Mudaliar assume that a low caste ultimately can become Mudaliar or high caste through a succession of name changes, so caste mobility. Thurston in 1901 and Bethel in 1965 points out, referred to the Tamil proverb which suggests how through a succession of changes in lifestyle, the Kallar caste becomes the Mudaliar caste. First, the Kallar caste becomes the Madavar caste and then the Ahamudayan caste. Then the Ahamudayan caste progressively changes to become the Vellala caste before becoming the Mudaliar caste. The label Mudaliar functions as both caste name and caste title, that is, as a religious as well as a political emblem, depending on how it is used and who uses it. Conclusion. हाँ नीना लिंक यहाँ पे शेयर नहीं होता है. Okay, conclusion. So, caste titles are conceptually linked with village corporate authority and politico-economic dominance. Corporateness of village life, with everyone in the village subordinate to the adjudicative and penalizing power of the village or of the caste, is a significant part of the authority structure which every villager comprehends. Intra and intercaste mechanisms of social control, okay, intra-caste mechanisms as well as intercaste mechanisms of social control depend on the villager accepting the authority of group action, which is represented in the panchayat or the council of elders. Various castes, and particularly the elders who have the authority to make decisions, use the symbols or labels of authority structure as their own emblems of identity. In different localities and regions of the Tamil country, there are different labels that symbolize corporate authority. In western Tamil Nadu, a common symbol is Gondar. In the north, Mudaliar, Naikar and Chettiar, and in the south, Muppanar and Nadar or Nadar. Over 100 symbols are used as titles by Tamil castes. Some castes have several titles that do not necessarily denote corporate authority. Some castes have several titles that do not necessarily denote corporate authority. The same caste, which is located in different regions, may have different titles that correspond to the symbolic expression of corporate authority in other regions. Exactly. This is a very important sentence. The same caste, which is located in different regions, may have different titles that correspond to the symbolic expression of corporate authority in other regions. The symbols of corporate authority are often fused with the symbols of politico-economic dominance. Right. The symbols of corporate authority are often fused with the symbols of politico-economic dominance. Politico-economically dominant castes use these symbols as titles and often as caste names as well. The authority of the dominant castes is accepted by other castes, and certain labels become regional labels of corporate authority and of politico-economic dominance. ये सेंटेंस पूरा का पूरा ना मुझे की टेकअवेज में लिखना है. एक मिनट थोड़ा रुको, थोड़ा तुम लोग डिबेट करते रहो. This is a very important line. Authority of dominant castes is accepted by other castes. Certain labels become regional labels of corporate authority and of politico-economic dominance or power, क्या बोला? Politico-economic dominance, right? Very important. Okay, let's continue. In some regions of Tamil Nadu, certain castes are of Telugu derivation. In some regions of Tamil Nadu, certain caste titles are of Telugu derivation, reflecting the fact that for over 400 years, political control in the villages of many parts of Tamil Nadu was in the hands of Telugu speakers, whose chieftains or kings had conquered Tamils. Dumo's 1970 insightful analysis of caste dominance, which showed that dominance is always politico-economic and status is always ritual, religious, can be applied to understand the distinctive features of caste titles and caste names, to characterize caste titles as political emblems and caste names as religious emblems. And we know now it is not entirely correct, as later scholars have pointed out, like Irfan Habib and Nicholas Dirks, that yes, dominance is always politico-economic and status is always ritual. ऐसा नहीं है. Dominance is definitely politico-economic, but status is simply a side effect of that politico-economic dominance. Okay, status अलग से ritual आसमान से नहीं टपका है, ठीक है. उसका रिचुअल स्टेटस भी आया है बिकॉज ऑफ द पॉलिटिको इकोनॉमिक डोमिनेंस, जो कि कुछ सालों बाद होता है, कुछ जनरेशन बाद होता है, अगर वो सस्टेन करता है वो पॉलिटिको इकोनॉमिक डोमिनेंस ऑफ दैट कास्ट. That is just the thing that Dumo got wrong, but that's not really relevant here. Religious emblems. However, some castes that are neither politico-economically powerful nor ritually pure also use caste titles. Thus, it is necessary to interpret caste titles in terms of their link with the symbols of corporate authority within the village. These titles are deployed by every non-Brahmin caste as symbols of decision-making authority. Okay, these titles are deployed by every non-Brahmin caste as symbols of decision-making authority. It can be said that caste titles are emblems that serve as vehicles of leadership and decision-making within the caste, and that the emblems serve as symbols of dominance and power when a caste is, in reality, politico-economically powerful in the village. Thus, the validation of titles has two contexts: within the caste and in inter-caste relationships. Any caste can adopt a locally relevant title, and the leaders will command within that caste the respect and authority associated with the title. When the caste is politico-economically dominant, the title is accepted as a symbol of dominance of the caste in the village. When the title is accepted as the caste name by other castes, the ritual status of the caste is elevated. Dekho, exactly what we just pointed out, that politico-economic dominance is, in the end, basically always the precursor to status dominance, ritual status dominance. The view of Dumo 1970 and Tyler 1973 and others that the Hindu village is a miniature kingdom with the dominant patron caste functioning as the king is correct, but we must add that every caste headman, irrespective of whether the caste is dominant in the region or not, is functionally a king in his caste, little kings, kind of. Just as it is legitimate, this is actually Dumo is right here, just as it is legitimate to have caste titles for the dominant caste to represent its politico-economic role in inter-caste relationships, it is legitimate to have caste titles for the headman of any non-Brahmin caste to discharge intra-caste functions. Caste brethren adopt the same titles of their headman, and the proliferation of caste titles occurs. High ritual status commonly corresponds to or is congruent with greater politico-economic power, and ritually low-ranking castes attempt to change their ritual status when their politico-economic conditions improve. यही तो है कोड फंडा ऑफ कास्ट दैट नोबडी फकिंग गेट्स इन द कॉमी एकेडेमिया. ये सेंटेंस तो मुझे पॉइंट आउट करना पड़ेगा. ये कॉपी पेस्ट होगा क्या? ये कॉपी पेस्ट भी नहीं होगा. अब मैं इतना बड़ा सेंटेंस कैसे लिखूं? तो रुको, मैं ना सिर्फ पेज नंबर लिख के रखता हूं. अभी इतना टाइम नहीं इतना बड़ा सेंटेंस लिखने का. पेज 9 फर्स्ट पैराग्राफ. मैं जब की टेकअवेज नोट डाउन करूंगा तब वहां से लिख लूंगा. So high ritual status, listen to this, probably the most important sentence we've discussed so far. High ritual status commonly corresponds to or is congruent with greater politico-economic power, and ritually low-ranking castes attempt to change their ritual status when their politico-economic conditions improve. यही हमेशा हमेशा होगा, ये inevitable है. A good deal of theorizing in anthropology has focused on the dynamics of this process, and as a result, scholars have neglected to examine the role of caste titles as political emblems of caste identity in their own right, quote unquote, in their own right, not necessarily relating to establishing status summation, as pointed out by Barth in 1960, or to caste mobility, or to the Varna hierarchy. I suggest that the following diagrammatic model better illustrates caste identity than the Varna analog model, which I discussed in the introduction. तो एक मिनट यहाँ पे तुम लोग जरा ये डायग्राम देख लो, ठीक है. रिचुअल स्ट्रक्चर और पॉलिटिकल स्ट्रक्चर दो तरफ हैं. रिचुअल स्ट्रक्चर से क्या आता है? इंटरनल कॉन्सेप्चुअल स्ट्रक्चर्स ऑफ रिचुअल प्यूरिटी एंड पोल्यूशन, ऑक्यूपेशन, एंडोगेमी. पॉलिटिकल स्ट्रक्चर से क्या आता है? इंटरनल कॉन्सेप्चुअल स्ट्रक्चर्स ऑफ कॉर्पोरेट अथॉरिटी, पॉलिटिको इकोनॉमिक डोमिनेंस. फिर रिचुअल एम्बलम्स, कास्ट नेम्स, वर्ना लेबल्स, पॉलिटिकल एम्बलम्स से कास्ट टाइटल्स. Then, caste identity is not simply a matter of one's affiliation with his ritually pure or impure endogamous group and the linkage of such a group to the symbols of Varna hierarchy. There exists a distinctive aspect of caste identity which is political and not conceptually linked with religion. Not conceptually linked with religion, guys. There exists a distinctive aspect of caste identity which is political and not conceptually linked with religion. It is necessary to recognize the distinctive structures of the religious and political domains for a fuller understanding of caste identity. A note says the Tamils number about 40 million, most of whom live in the Tamil Nadu state, Tamil country of South India. The caste system as it functions in Tamil Nadu resembles in many ways that of other regions of India. The many social cleavages or oppositions in Tamil Nadu are between Brahmins and non-Brahmins and between non-Brahmin castes and untouchable castes. This paper deals with non-Brahmin castes. The primary source material presented here was collected through anthropological fieldwork during 1970 through 1971 in Tamil Nadu villages. Okay, ये भी मुझे नोट डाउन करना पड़ेगा एज अ की टेक अवे. ये जो लास्ट पैराग्राफ था वो फिगर का, फिगर 1 लास्ट पैराग्राफ. ये हुआ हमारा आज का पहला पेपर. अब हम सेकंड पेपर में जाएंगे. तो गाइस, कास्ट आइडेंटिटी हैज नथिंग टू डू विद रिलीजन एंड और वर्ना हायरार्की. लोल, एक मिनट. नेक्स्ट पेपर है द लबाई डिस्कशन, द लबाई मुस्लिम्स ऑफ पुलिकट. Now I'll take a bit of a 2-minute break and drink some water. Yeah, Nitin, some professions got declared untouchable or ritually defiling, ritually impure, etc. because of the lack of the importance of the profession. Okay, if the profession was looked down upon, the person was looked down upon, his entire clan, and since everyone was in his clan was in the same profession, all of them got looked down upon. Let's I mean, just compare it with today. Which people are looked down upon? Someone or the other looks down upon someone or the other. ठीक है, इतना तो क्लियर है ना. अरे मेरे बाल को क्या हुआ? तो like upper caste Brahmin communes who claim to be in solidarity with all poor people, they claim to be super pro subaltern, etc. Why do they hate Biharis so much? What do you think is the reason? Why do so many people in India hate Biharis and Bhojpuri music and Bhojpuri culture? Okay, ऐसा तो नहीं है कि भाई किसी को भोजपुरी म्यूजिक के लिरिक्स से कोई प्रॉब्लम है. अगर सेक्सुअलाइजेशन ही प्रॉब्लम होता, which भोजपुरी म्यूजिक largely focuses on, So everyone would have the same kind of hatred for hip hop, music created by black people, especially music created by black rappers, black female rappers. Okay, every 90% of hip hop is about some body parts of the woman or other. It's about wet pussies, vagina, butt, etc. मगर प्रॉब्लम है भोजपुरी को लेकर. कैसे भाई, क्यों? वही है looking down upon someone or the other because of pretty much no reason or some personal reason. कुछ ना कुछ हो सकता है. तो we must all work against not looking down upon someone on the base on flimsy basis, etc. But even people who claim to be commies, anti-caste, are fully pro solidarity with poor people, etc. ऐसे लोग भी ऐसे ऐसे ट्रैप में कैसे पड़ते हैं? वही है एक sort of the inevitability, the inevitable flaw of human nature बोल सकते हो. मगर ये flaw तुम अकेले अकेले हिंदुइज्म पे नहीं डाल सकते हो. That's all we are arguing. Yeah, Nicki Minaj, of course. How is Nicki Minaj's lyrics anything different from Bhojpuri lyrics? Okay, let's take one comment. Dark Optimistic is saying, any info about Bhawal Sannyasi Raja, and who are the people with Bhawal surnames? And what about Kundu surnames? Are they related to Marathas? I don't know. Kundu surnames are, I think, scheduled caste as far as I know. I'm not sure. Bhawal Sannyasi, so yes, there have been two movies. Ek Je Chilo Raja by Srijit Mukherjee and Shonnashi Raja Uttam Kumar's in Bengali. Even Taylor Swift is Bhojpuri tear shit. I'm not sure about Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has largely feminist lyrics, no? I'm not sure. Present Hindus with primitive society. The primitive society, being wealthy, was transforming into a settled community, which the nomadic tribes could. Okay. Pavneet's new video on caste census. He has explained where untouchability came from. It was self-untouchability to not spread communicable diseases. So now, when the communicable disease goes away, why do they keep remaining? Go on, get called untouchable. That's the problem. Kundus were related to Marathas. In traditional Bengali households, they are referred to as Borgis. Oh, fuck. So are they people who stayed behind? Holy shit. There are countless Bengali Kundus. Fuck. Never knew about this. Kya ajeeb history hai India ka bhai. Okay. So this is a fascinating paper again. The Hindu caste system and Muslim ethnicity. The Labbai of a Tamil village in South India by Jacob Pandian. This is a paper from 1978. Okay. California State University, Fullerton. So this paper shows how Muslim caste system cannot be blamed upon Hindu caste system. Okay, this is written by Jacob Pandian. Kundus are Borgis. Kya ajeeb history hai. Okay, okay, let's start this paper now. So the abstract of the paper says an analysis of the ethnicity and the ethno-history of a Tamil-speaking Muslim group named Labbai. Okay, एक मिनट थोड़ा और background देख लेते हैं. कहाँ से है? ऑक्सफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी प्रेस या कैम्ब्रिज? ड्यूक यूनिवर्सिटी प्रेस. नाइस. जर्नल क्या है? अमेरिकन सोसाइटी फॉर एथनो हिस्ट्री विद या जे स्टोर 19 ईयर कहाँ गया? या 1978. हिंदू कास्ट सिस्टम एंड मुस्लिम एथनिसिटी, जेकब पांडियन. या स्प्रिंग 1978. ओके, लेट्स स्टार्ट. An analysis of the ethnicity and the ethno-history of a Tamil-speaking Muslim group named Labbai is undertaken in an effort to demonstrate that although similarities can be found between the caste orientation of Hindu groups and Labbai ethnicity, okay, although similarities can be found, such similarities occur from diverse principles of boundary maintenance, okay, not similar principles of boundary maintenance and intergroup relationships, rather than from the operation of a not from an operation of a unitary, uniform cognitive and motivational orientation of both the Hindus and Muslims. Okay, so the caste systems of Muslims and the caste systems of Hindus may be similar, but they don't have the same unitary, uniform cognitive and motivational orientation, nor do they have similar principles of boundary maintenance or intergroup relationships. That's the abstract. Introduction. अरे ये बार बार साइड स्क्रॉल करना पड़ेगा क्या? ठीक है, और जूम आउट करते हैं. So the objective of this paper is to describe the politico-economic environment and the ethnicity or cultural orientations about peoplehood of a Tamil-speaking Muslim group known as Labbai, as the group has historically maintained its distinctiveness and continues to maintain its boundary vis-a-vis in context to other Muslims and non-Muslims in a multi-caste village. Okay, this Labbai Muslim caste maintains the distance and the distinctiveness from other Muslims and other non-Muslims in a multi-caste village. देखो भाई क्या हो रहा है. The paper also discusses Labbai ethnicity with reference to Hindu concepts of social hierarchy and ritual purity. Data presented were collected in the village of Pulicat in the province of India called Tamil Nadu or Tamil country during 1970 through 1971. In this introductory section, I will present briefly the theoretical implications of my study. Summarizing several studies on Muslim groups that function in the Hindu social environment, Mandelbaum in 1970 and Dumo in 1970 have concluded that the social organization of Muslim groups is similar to that of Hindu groups. The institutional aspect, which is characteristic of Hindu civilization, namely caste, is found to structure relationships among Muslims and between Muslims and Hindu groups. Dumo further notes that Muslims as well as other non-Hindus who function within the parameters of Hindu social order have acquired the basic quote-unquote psychological dispositions of Hindus. Okay, these are the arguments that today's commies or mainstream caste-based politicians presume and further and propagate. Okay, Christians or Indian Muslims ka bhi casteism aaya because of them getting influenced by Hindus. All this is from Dumo, which is that Hindu worldview permeates and encompasses everyone who participates in Hindu civilization to the extent that the egalitarian ideology of Islam functions in only a modified form, apparently because of Hinduism. Okay. That the above generalization tells us something about the use of the caste institution by non-Hindus is not disputed in this paper. However, it is not only misleading but erroneous to infer that an understanding of the institution or principles of caste enables us to understand how Muslims in India organize themselves internally and externally. Muslims in India are not a homogeneous group. Historically and culturally, they are diverse, having established distinctive adaptations to different politico-economic environments, and the kinds of relationships that exist between Hindus and Muslims vary greatly. अच्छा, इस पेपर का ना की टेकअवेज लेने में बहुत कुछ लेना पड़ेगा. की टेकअवेज लग रहा है. Two features of caste, namely endogamy and hierarchical ranking, that are found among. Did you all hear? This was very fascinating already. Two features of caste, namely endogamy and hierarchical ranking, that are found among Muslims may result from the use of a number of different principles, not merely from the use of caste principles such as the Hindu hierarchical scheme and the ideology of purity impurity. Okay, so Jacob Pandian is already pointing out that the endogamy practiced by Muslims or the hierarchies practiced by Muslims has nothing to do with Hindu hierarchical schemes and endogamy and ideas of purity and impurity. And he's pointing out that Muslims have been diverse and stuff, but it's erroneous to infer that their ideas come from Hindu ideas of organization. Lol. Internal endogamy and ranking among Muslims in India have their loci, they have their location, have their source in ethnicity with reference to alien or indigenous origins. Okay, meaning either Persian, Arabic, or Afghan, or Indian converted Christian Muslims, and in class with reference to socio-economic status rather than ritual status, as is the case with caste. The Hindu paradigm of Varna, with the priesthood and the untouchable at opposite poles, and the three other categories, namely Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, composed of various jati groups which strive for politico-economic power, does not serve as a model for the Muslim endogamous or jati groups as it might for the Hindu endogamous groups. तो तुम मुस्लिम कास्टिज्म कैसे हिंदू कास्टिज्म पे ब्लेम कर सकते हो? Muslims associate bodily cleanliness and ritual sanctity with their religious orientation, which evolved in the tribal context of Middle Eastern experiences. Right? They are cosplaying their caste hierarchies and caste statuses and practices from their Middle Eastern experiences. They may believe scavengers and others who engage in similar occupations to be unclean, but such an association is not the same as that of the Hindu ideology of purity impurity, despite the fact that behaviorally both may produce the same results. Yeah, but the reasons are not the same. Therefore, it can't be blamed on Hinduism. What a brilliant paper. Hindus and non-Hindus, quote unquote, know how to function in the Hindu social environment, which is not to say that they share each other's worldviews and ethos. Okay, worldview ethos nahi same ho gaya. Brilliant. In a paper devoted to examining the contributions made by the 20th century scholars have analyzed the societies in the geographical political boundary of India, pointed out by Ahmad in 1972, make some pertinent observations about the validity of generalizations made by sociologists and social anthropologists concerning social structure and processes in India. ये अब थोड़ा की टेकअवे लिखने दो. Muslim caste organization has nothing to do with Hindu caste organization. Hindu caste organization, because the worldviews, reasonings, conceptualizations are completely different. Are different and based on different things. This is probably the key takeaway from the entire paper. So, in a paper devoted to examining the contributions made by 20th century scholars who have analyzed the societies in the geographical political boundary of India, Ahmad 1972, makes some pertinent observations about the validity of generalizations made by sociologists and social anthropologists concerning social structure and processes in India. He correctly points out that scholars have seldom investigated in detail the non-Hindu traditions of India, and points out that there is a quote unquote pronounced tendency among sociologists to equate Hindu society with India. Furthermore, no comprehensive comparative analysis of intra and interreligious group processes in India has been undertaken, and both Western and Indian scholarship is marked by Hindu centrism. के सब बुरा चीज हिंदुइज्म की वजह से है. Hindu centrism, I suggest, stems from a fallacious scholarly assumption that in order for a sociocultural system to persist, the component parts or individuals or groups must have shared values and or normative consensus. From this point of view, it is logical to infer that in order for Hindu society or Indian society, used as synonymous by most scholars, to persist, the social groups which are covered by this societal blanket must themselves be composed of threads which ultimately make up the blanket. In other words, because a very interesting argument. In other words, because an identification is made that there exists a single entity called Hindu society, it becomes necessary to explain how it exists. And the explanation is that both Hindu and non-Hindu groups believe in and are motivated by the principles, patterns, worldview, ethos, the themes, or what have you of the Hindu society. When one looks, quote unquote, deeply enough, one can always, quote unquote, see the operation of these, quote unquote, movers in Hindu society. I suggest in this paper that although the grand theories of caste, Hindu social order, or quote unquote society in India may provide intellectual satisfaction that the essence of Hindu or in Indian mind has been captured in a single formula, such theories are not sufficient to explain the multifarious conceptual and behavioral systems that coexist within the politico-geographical boundary of India. Fascinating. We must look closely into the distinctive cultural traditions that emerge and function in different politico-economic environments. We must examine how these traditions enable their users to coexist in a polycultural social context. Wallace in 1970 has convincingly argued that cognitive and motivational non-sharing has adaptive significance for any socio-cultural system. Okay? Remember this point. Important. Cognitive and motivational non-sharing. ठीक है, तुम्हारा अगर कोई रीजन है to not share your lifestyle and your cognitive reasons to not share your lifestyle, it has adaptive significance for any socio-cultural system. Complete or total cognitive and motivational sharing is never attained by any socio-cultural system. This is very important. I'll mark this as a key takeaway. I'll write this entire sentence down as notes. cognitive and motivational non-sharing has adaptive you all should write these points down as well for having debates. Significance for, and because these are from legit academics, for have adaptive significance for any socio-cultural system. Complete. नितिन कहाँ पे है? नितिन, नितिन देखो क्या आर्ग्यूमेंट है यहाँ पे. कंप्लीट और टोटल कॉग्निटिव एंड मोटिवेशनल के मोटिवेशन क्या है नॉन शेयरिंग करने का, ठीक है, या फिर शेयर नहीं करने का. मोटिवेशनल शेयरिंग इज नेवर, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. ये अच्छी चीज, अच्छी बात नहीं है एक फ्लॉ ही, मगर है ये इनेविटेबल फ्लॉ जिसके लिए तुम अकेले इंडियन सोसाइटी या हिंदू सोसाइटी को ब्लेम नहीं कर सकते हो. मोटिवेटेड एज is never attained, and motivational sharing is never attained by any socio-cultural system. Brilliant. Pointed out by someone called Wallace. उसका पूरा नाम हम देख लेंगे बाद में. Chitrils is saying, please read the Criminal Tribes Act 1871 and the Depressed Classes Act, which later became the Scheduled Castes Act 1936. You will understand why particular castes became lowered in hierarchy. Gautam is asking, are you planning to watch the debate Trump? कब है? अनाउंस हुआ क्या? कमला सच में डिबेट करेगी? क्या डिबेट होगा? फालतू का पूरा तो मतलब मग्ड अप क्वेश्चंस होगा, मतलब प्रिपेयर्ड क्वेश्चंस होगा, प्रिपेयर्ड आंसर्स होंगे. कौन मॉडरेट करेगा? कहाँ पे हो रहा है? मुझे पता नहीं कुछ. तो अ सिविलाइजेशनल, हाँ, तो even the so-called simple homogeneous cultures are not homogeneous with respect to all their members having a similar or identical mental map. Fuck, ये तो ऑर्बिटलिंग है. क्या बोल रहा है देखो. Even the so-called simple, not complex, homogeneous cultures are not homogeneous with respect to all their members having a simple, similar or identical mental map. तो सबका ही कुछ ना कुछ hierarchies, थोड़ा बहुत vertical, थोड़ा बहुत horizontal तो होगा ही. A civilizational complex which we identify as Hindu or Indian is composed of multiple linguistic / religious cultural traditions, and the similarities in the organization of groups occur as a product of the universally applicable principles of boundary maintenance, or as Barth in 1969 puts it, the quote-unquote social organization of cultural differences. Well said. Rather than as a result of uniquely Hindu paradigm operating at macro and micro levels. Guys, अरे listen to this sentence. कितना कीटे कभी लू, ये तो बहुत ही सिग्निफिकेंट है. एक मिनट, मुझे पेज नंबर मार्क कर लेने दो. इतना लिख नहीं सकते अभी, बहुत बड़ा पैराग्राफ है. तो दिस इज फैसिनेटिंग. ओपनली बोल दिया कि इट्स नॉट यूनिकली हिंदू. नितिन कहाँ गया? असली वक्त पे गायब हो गया. तो a civilizational complex which we identify as Hindu or Indian is composed of multiple linguistic, religious, cultural traditions, and the similarities in the organization of groups occur as a product of the universally applicable principles. Universally applicable principles. Guys, universally applicable principles of boundary maintenance, or as Barth puts it, the social organization of cultural differences, rather than as a result of a uniquely Hindu paradigm operating at macro and micro levels. Fuck. देखो, ये सब लेजिट एकेडेमिया में ही है. लोग पॉलिटिक्स करेंगे अलग से, अलग अलग चीजें उठा के, तो हमको भी वही करना पड़ेगा. क्या करें? यूनिवर्सली एप्लीकेबल Principles of boundary. This is very fascinating. Principles of boundary, or as Barth puts it, uh, social organization of cultural differences. ये अच्छी बात नहीं हो सकता है, मगर ये इनएविटेबल है कि नहीं? Social organization of cultural differences. I love this paper. क्या बढ़िया काम किया है भाई जे पांडियन. इन लोगों को किसी के बारे में, मतलब किसी को इन लोगों के बारे में पता ही नहीं है. अभय सिंह, रीड माय प्रीवियस कमेंट. अभय 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 का प्रीवियस कमेंट. हाँ, बट डजंट दिस रिफ्यूट द कोर हिंदुत्व आर्ग्यूमेंट ऑफ भारत बीइंग one Hindu civilization? Yes, in some contexts it does, but you see, in which context we argue that everything is Indian and everything is Bharatiya, it has its limitation. No, and we have always known that it has its limitation, that if India and every Indian is in fact in some way or the other Hindu, then Savarkar would not have to make arguments that no, see, ye hai ek concept called Hindutva and everyone has to do some sort of has to have some sorts of stances to be called a cultural Hindu and stuff. वो तो नहीं है, which shows that not everything in India is Hindu, okay? Because there are people who refuse to adhere to Hindu ways of thinking, right? And especially the Muslims pointed out here, and Christians to some extent. So obviously that argument has its limitations. But you see, Abhay, very good question, but these arguments are put forward by Hindutvadis mostly for eras of pre-Abrahamic cultures coming to India. No, that was completely a wrong, grammatically wrong English, grammatically wrong sentence. Okay, I'm forgetting everything. So yeah, I'm very dazed with what I just read. So anyway, so those arguments are put forward by Hindutvadis to describe an era when Abrahamic faiths had not arrived in India. So in that context, it's right to say that everything in India is Hindu. But when Muslims and Christians arrived, and with their ways of life, after that, everything can't be called Hindu or Hindutva, or Indian civilization is equal to Hindu civilization, because then we would not need Hindutva as a separate thing. We would not need Bankim Chandranath Boshu or Savarkar. We would not need Hindutva today. We would not have the problems that Hindutva tries to address, right? So yes, there is I think an expiry date where we must draw the line that yes, up until here everything is Indian and everything is Hindu. From here onwards everything is not Hindu and not Indian, but it can be. That's all. Where do you find these papers from? From which crevices of internet? These are rare diamonds. Yes, mysterious sociologist hides this in his dark Dexter's laboratory. So, social organization of cultural differences at micro and macro levels. Okay, people in any given socio-cultural system can and do participate in its institutions with diverse motives and epistemological bases. Exactly. And Savarkar is saying that yes, let go of these different motives and epistemological bases to come under this umbrella of Hindutva. That is the argument. His argument is not that everything is inherently, implicitly Hindu just because it's in India. Epistemological bases that result in similar behavior. The larger sociocultural systems, in terms of having large numbers of people and several types of groupings, maintain themselves through facilitating or institutionalizing cognitive and motivational sharing. Oh, institutionalizing bhi bol diya. So Indian civilization is not civilization. Depends on which era you talk about. If you say today's the country of India is Indian civilization, not really, because there are many anti-Hindu things going on. It's definitely a descendant of the Hindu civilization, yes. And another argument would be that does the existence of anti-Hindu epistemologies, does the existence of anti-Hindu epistemologies in the Hindu civilization mean that the Hindu civilization does not exist? No, because what is the constitution saying? Who is accepting the constitution? वहां पे एक majority का view लेना important है. मेजोरिटी का एक्सेप्टेंस पॉइंट आउट करना इंपॉर्टेंट है, विच इज वाई आई एम नॉट इन फेवर ऑफ taking away complete credit from Christians, even though they did create a more tolerant and accepting society later on, after having their years of complete intolerance and insanity. तो वो एक्सेप्टेंस भाई अगर उस सोसाइटी से ही आ रहा है तो उस सोसाइटी को क्रेडिट देना है. तो the tolerance that Indian society today has is the largely the tolerance that today India has is because it's a descendant of the Hindu civilization. But there are many intolerant sections in Indian society which have non-Hindu epistemologies. It's a very nuanced point to argue. So yeah, Wallace's theoretical approach is ideally suited for the examination of group boundary maintenance and intergroup relationships in the Hindu or Indian society, where hundreds of culturally distinctive groups coexist. Wallace explains that cognitive uniformity is dysfunctional to sociocultural systems. Knowing fully each other's motivations and cognitions is operationally counterproductive, and if cognitive uniformity is a prerequisite, it would severely handicap a system, because the survival of a system would depend on the humanly impossible feat of everyone in the system knowing it in its entirety. Okay. Human beings function in a system with what Wallace refers to as equivalence structure models that permit them to participate in the system by predicting each other's behavior without having to cognitively motivationally replicate themselves. क्या बात है. So I don't necessarily have to know let's say I don't necessarily have to do everything that a politician does, or what a PhD does, or what an IAS Babu does, but I must have some basic amount of prediction that what does it mean to be an IAS Babu, what does it mean to be a politician or PhD. Okay, I can expect certain behaviors and professional outcomes from his existence. That's all. Tamil country and the Labbai. The expression Tamil country is the translation of the binomial term Tamil Nadu, which in the modern nation state of India constitutes a linguistic state or province. Tamil, a Dravidian language which is spoken by about 40 million people, is the lingua franca of the province, which covers roughly a territory of 50,000 square miles in the southeast of India. During the British rule of India, which lasted about 200 years from the 18th century, most of the territory was part of a larger unit called Madras Presidency, named after the city of Madras, which has continued to be the capital. This paper is from 1978. The ancient socio-political history of the Tamils is known to us through the Tamil literary tradition, which dates back to the 3rd century BC. There were in Tamil country 3 Tamil kingdoms called Cholanadu, Pandian and Nadu, which whose power waxed and waned for about 1,000 years. At different periods, parts of Tamil country were ruled by non-Tamils, including Urdu-speaking Muslims from the north of India, until the British established political hegemony in the 18th century. The Tamils are internally divided into various endogamous groups or jati or subcaste structured by the Hindu institution of caste. In the concluding section of this paper, a brief discussion of the caste system is undertaken. For an in-depth study of how caste functions in a Tamil village, see Betel's work in 1965, and for a regional study of the caste system in Tamil country, see Beck's work from 1972. Okay, let's see. Abhay is saying, so Indian and Hindu civilization is the same thing in continuous form, which Abrahamic ideology is not being right. The group is now public. The name is Anushka Sama. Okay. Linguist is saying, I mean, as per academics, Korea is also not Korean civilization, and their argument is that the identity of being a Korean that is outside of their kingdom is lacking in ancient. See, sea trade between the Tamils and the peoples of the Middle East was a common feature from about the Christian era, and there were several coastal settlements with Arab Muslims among the populations of these settlements from about the 8th century AD, 800 AD onwards. So 980. Arab influence on sea trade had declined by the 16th century when the Portuguese established maritime supremacy. Before the decline, however, in many parts of Tamil country, small groups of Muslims had established themselves with claims to non-Indian ancestry, particularly Arabian. Among these groups were those who used the name Labbai as an emblem of their identity to signify Arabian descent. तो ये देखो एक आउटसाइडर ढूंढना, एक आउटग्रुप डेजिग्नेट करना, डायग्नोस करना शुरू हो जाता है यहां से कि भाई हम इन ग्रुप है क्योंकि हम लब्बई हैं, क्योंकि हमारा डिसेंट अरेबिया से है. तो रीजनिंग अलग है, मगर कोई ना कोई हमेशा इन ग्रुप आउटग्रुप ढूंढ रहा ही है. तो the term Labbai was also used generically to identify Tamil speaking Muslims as a whole, thus denoting that these Muslims were converts from Hinduism rather than aliens. It is probably not possible to prove or disprove these claims. It is likely that some were the descendants of the children of Arab traders and their Tamil wives, and other were converts to Islam from Hinduism. As this paper is concerned with people's perception and conception of themselves, it is not necessary to deal with historical validation as to whether they were pure Arabs or not. So this is not a paper of genetics. This is a paper on what these people themselves are claiming. That exactly, beautiful. The label Labbai therefore had a dual meaning of territoriality, क्योंकि हम तो है अरब से, one referring to Arabian and the other to Tamil origins. It was a label that was used by Tamil speaking Muslims to signify their Arabian origins, but it also delineated a category of Muslims speaking Tamil. Okay, because not every Muslim who speaks Tamil is Labbai, remember? So it is just one category of Tamil speaking Muslims, okay? And it is just one category of Muslims. Yeah, so the distinctiveness of Tamil speaking Muslims who claimed Arabian ancestry derived from religious identification with scrupulous adherence to Quranic injunctions expressed in their food and dress habits and rites of passage. तो देखो, endogamous consumption patterns, endogamous marriage में endogamy और similar consumption pattern, ये हो जाता है हमेशा एक कास्ट हर जगह में inevitable. और उसका स्टेटस हायरार्की में क्या रैंक है वो डिपेंड करेगा उसका कंजम्पशन पैटर्न या फिर उसका प्रोफेशन मेनली, और थोड़ा बहुत इकोनॉमिक प्रोग्रेस कितना सिग्निफिकेंट है. Thus, their cultural distinctiveness could be referred to as deriving from the acceptance of Quranic rules rather than the cultural continuities with Middle East. और भी nuanced. Okay, their cultural distinctiveness is dependent upon their acceptance of Quranic rules, not on the cultural continuities with Middle East. No, Ninar. What J. Pandian is pointing out is that purity pollution is not even a factor in Islam, but actions similar to what you would do if you believed in purity and pollution, those same things are happening in Muslims as well, but because of completely different reasonings. That is the fascinating aspect of this paper. From about the 16th century, with the advent of Muslim invasions, Muslim settlements with Urdu speakers had become established in Tamil. What a brilliant research, man. So, from about the 16th century, with the advent of... No, एक minute, sorry, I'm interrupting myself. I'll point out something to Abhay here. Abhay, एक आर्ग्यूमेंट है, एक मतलब नॉर्मी मेन स्ट्रीम में कि इस्लाम में कास्टिज्म नहीं है, मगर एकेडेमिया में ये काइंड ऑफ ऊपर महल में गेटेड कम्युनिटीज में अंदर में सब लोग जानते हैं कि इस्लाम में भी कास्टिज्म है, मगर वहां पे उनका एडवांस्ड काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट है कि वो कास्टिज्म आया है बिकॉज ऑफ इंटरमिंगलिंग विद हिंदूज. तो हिंदू के कास्टिज्म फॉलो करने से वो देख देख के इन लोगों ने सीख लिया, which is completely being debunked by this person, Jacob Pandian. Okay. From about the 16th century, with the advent of Muslim invasions, Muslim settlements with Urdu speakers had become established in Tamil country and in other parts of South India. These Muslims too had various labels of ethnic identity. But as their language was associated with the politico-economic dominance of Muslim emperors and kings, language also served as an emblem of identity, separating them from non-Urdu speaking Muslims. Remember what Dr. Shomode has pointed out in the book we discussed yesterday, Being Hindu, and as well as his book, Seedbed of Pakistan, that states are culture power formations and they propagate power by using cultural symbols. तो कल्चरल सिंबल अगर है कोई स्टेट का कि देखो ये है उर्दू, ये है नॉन उर्दू, तो वन गेट्स वो स्टेट सैंक्शंस ऑफ डिफरेंट स्टेटस ग्रुप्स, राइट? Thus, in any discussion concerning the Muslims of Tamil country, it is necessary to point out that three variables of ethnicity operated, with religion, with Islam as the common denominator. Religion, language, and alienism served as emblems of identity, with some Muslims having all three in association with politico-economic dominance, and others having religion and alienness with no association with politico-economic dominance. Islamic sectarian differences are not examined in this paper because such differences have no relevance to the thesis of this paper. Yes, because we are not talking about Boda, Shia, Sunni. We are talking about different castes or caste-like behaviors of Muslims, regardless of their religious sect differences. Okay. The lack of symbolic association between politico-economic dominance and alien heritage resulted in the Tamil-speaking Muslims being ranked socially below the Urdu-speaking Muslims. The term Labbai was commonly used to identify indigenous origins rather than alien origins because the Labbai spoke Tamil, and in many parts of Tamil country it was a stigmatized identity. In the census reports of the British during the 19th and early 20th centuries, all Tamil-speaking Muslims were classified as Labbai, as opposed to the Urdu-speaking Muslims who were classified under different categories with reference to their ethnic origins and class symbols. Class symbols. The generic use of the term Labbai to designate all Tamil-speaking Muslims and its lack of prestige as a symbol of reference and address in modern Tamil country is noted in the report of the Backward Classes Commission of Tamil Nadu 1971. The report stated, quote, "The exact connotation of the term Labbai puzzled us at first, as generally it is not considered to be a term of respectable address. Some witnesses who appeared before us also testified to the fact that only some poorer sections of Muslims are described by this term. But reference to the caste census report of 1921 and of earlier decades confirmed the fact that this term was intended to cover all Tamil-speaking Muslims as distinguished from Urdu-speaking Muslims. In fact, the caste census of 1921 recorded Muslim population under four categories of Muslims: Labbai, Sheikh, Sayyid, and Pathan. Thurston, who is generally referred to on caste matters, also confirms that Labbai covers Tamil-speaking Muslims, as he pointed out in 1971. But the term Labbai also used as a mark of sacredness and of Arab heritage. Hussein, a Muslim member of the commission, notes that, quote, "Labbai is the Tamil form of the Arabic word Labbe. The above word is the root word, which means here I am and at your service. Labbaik is also derived from the root word Labbai. The early converts to Islam were known as Labbai because of their ready response to the divine call. In the census report of 1881, a very interesting description of the Labbais is found. Quote, found chiefly in Tanjore and Madura. They are Mappillas of the Coromandel coast, that is to say, converted Dravidians or Hindus with a slight admixture of Arab blood." End quote, 1971. Of central importance to this paper, because this is not a paper on genetics, of central importance to this paper is the fact that despite the common characterization of Tamil speakers as Labbai, the label as an emblem of identity signifies different things in different socio-political contexts and was used differently in different parts of Tamil country. Among the Tamil-speaking Muslims, endogamous groups using the label Labbai may or may not have social prestige and may or may not have stigma attributed to the label, depending on the socio-political history of that village and region of Tamil country, in which the groups participated as politico-economic leaders or did not. So everything comes down to politico-economic power anyway. In the next section, I describe the politico-economic history of a village and of an endogamous group which uses the label Labbai as a prestigious emblem of identity with reference to past economic affluence, past and present sacredness, and to Arab ancestry. The Labbai of this village separate themselves socially, culturally from other Tamil-speaking Muslims of the village and perceive and conceive of themselves as the custodians of Islam, functioning as the ritual specialists for the Muslims of the village as a whole. देखो नितिन कहाँ गया? तो जो डिस्कोर्स जो डिस्कशन हम ब्राह्मिन्स के लिए कर रहे थे वही अब तो यहाँ पे भी एप्लीकेबल है कि Labbais do not have the same kind of say or voice all across Tamil Nadu. In some contexts, they were just any Tamil-speaking Muslim. But in some contexts, some Tamil-speaking Muslims who considered themselves Labbais separated themselves from everyone else and considered themselves ritual specialists for Islam. The Tamil-speaking Muslims of the village are differentiated into Labbai and non-Labbai Muslims, with the former, meaning the Labbai, whose main occupation has been trade. Okay, so Labbais are people who have been mainly traders. Let's see अब कहाँ जाता है ये पेपर. Politico-economic environment. अब थोड़ा हम स्क्रीन के लेते हैं. Vinab is saying, is it the same but opposing thing that is happening now in Assam, that Assamese speaking Muslims don't? Exactly, Vinab. Brilliant deduction. भाई होल ऑफ पाकिस्तान हैज एग्जैक्टली उनका बिरादरी है, उनका तो स्लेवरी भी है उनके फार्म हाउसेस में. Politico economic environment. Pulicat village is located on the northern coast of Tamil country. Pulicat, like other port villages in Tamil territory, probably had a permanent settlement of Arab traders from early times. Barbosa, traveling through Tamil territory in the early 16th century, described Pulicat as a quote-unquote grand port which was frequented by an infinite number of Moorish vessels from all quarters. He says this in 1923. End quote. When the Dutch arrived on the coast of Tamil country in the early 17th century, they tried to eliminate both the Arab traders who functioned as middlemen in the trade between the peoples of India and the Straits of Settlements and the Portuguese. In 1609, they secured permission from a non-Tamil speaking Hindu king to build a trading post in Pulicat and fortified the village against the local princes and the Portuguese. Within 4 years, they had monopolized the eastern trade. Pulicat served as the seat of Dutch government in India, and under pressure from the Dutch, an English trading post established in Pulicat in 1619 was disbanded in 1622. 1619, by the way, is an important year because that's the year when slaves were first brought to USA in the ship called White Lion. In the beginning, Hindu traders and chieftains assisted the Dutch. Okay, but this did not last long. Initially, a Hindu from Chettiar caste served as their agent, but soon deserted them to serve Hindu kings who were hostile to the Dutch. It is likely that the Dutch came to depend on the Tamil-speaking Muslim traders who lacked quote-unquote nationalist loyalties. Pulicat was occupied by a non-Tamil speaking Hindu king. Okay, Pulicat was occupied by a non-Tamil speaking Hindu king in 1626, and in 1644 an Urdu speaking Muslim general defeated the Dutch. But these incursions did not hamper the Dutch monopoly of trade. The Dutch participated vigorously in many of the battles of Hindu chieftains and Muslim generals, supporting the side whose success would most benefit the Dutch presence in Pulicat. Okay, very important. So the Dutch were going on participating vigorously in many of the battles of Hindu chieftains and Muslim generals, supporting any side which would benefit them, of course. तो कहीं पे हिंदू चिफ्टेन का को सपोर्ट कर रहा था डच, कहीं पे मुस्लिम जनरल्स को सपोर्ट कर रहा था. In 1689, the seat of Dutch government in India was moved to a southern port, which the Dutch had captured from the Portuguese, thus reducing Pulicat to the rank of a principality. This is from Burgess's work in 1939, Sewell's work in 1932, Krishnaswamy's work in 1964, and Sridharan's work in 1965. The Dutch rule in Pulicat lasted, with a few interruptions, for 214 years. In the 17th century, the area surrounding Pulicat became under a Muslim king and was ceded to the English in 1760 as a Jagir or estate. The English fought and defeated the Dutch in 1781 and again in 1785 and 1795. On the main road in Pulicat, there is a marker with the inscription, quote, which says, site of the first Dutch settlement in India, fort called Geldria. The spot was finally captured by the English in 1795, end quote. This is the name. This is the marker. Dutch control of Pulicat actually lasted until 1825, when the village was annexed to the Chingleput district, which had been given to the English by the Muslim king at an earlier date. Dutch documents indicate that the Dutch had closer contact with Tamil-speaking Muslim traders claiming Arab descent than with other Muslim and Hindu groups. Private ownership of property or land was permitted, but the Dutch imposed severe restrictions on where and how houses should be built. The Dutch देखो क्या अजीब बात है, यहाँ पे आके यहाँ के लोगों को बोल रहा है कि कहाँ तुम जमीन खरीदोगे नहीं खरीदोगे. The Dutch distinguished themselves as gentlemen and characterized the Tamil-speaking Muslim traders as Moors, who were held to be distinctive from the other Muslim groups. The decline of Pulicat as a port started even before the Dutch left Pulicat. In the 19th century, the English-controlled port at Madras, 25 miles south of Pulicat, was expanding, and eastern trade was channeled mostly through this port. By the latter part of the 18th century, the Dutch were no longer the number one sea power. Okay, the fact, और मार्तंड वर्मा ने तो वैसे भी बहुत मतलब गड्ढे में डाल दिया था उन लोगों को. The fact that the customs house at Pulicat was closed and Pulicat ceased to be a port of call in the 19th century did not by itself destroy the traders and weavers of Pulicat. The Muslim and Hindu traders of Pulicat had access to the port at Madras via canals, which the English had built in the early 19th century. Lol. What changed the whole politico-economic environment was the English policy of systematic annihilation of the indigenous textile industry and trade. A shock, a disruption in the system. The English destroyed the local economy by heavily taxing local goods and banning direct import and export by the natives, and eventually controlled the economy of the vast territory that had come under their possession in the 19th century. Whereas the Dutch were satisfied to eliminate middlemen and amass the profits of trade for themselves, the English took over the entire trade operations. This led them into conflict with the native kings as well as with other Western traders and resulted in disruption of the economic and political structures of the society. The territory under the English was a protected colony. That is, the English economy was protected as English goods were imported tax-free. Within 50 years after the departure of the Dutch, the number of handlooms in Pulicat decreased from about 1,000 to 200 or less. The weavers, other artisan castes and the Hindu traders migrated from Pulicat. A few Muslim and Hindu traders of Pulicat continued their profession, collaborating with English businessmen based in Madras. The main trade commodity was the colored cotton cloth called lungi, which was in great demand in those countries known today as Malaya and Thailand. A few Tamil-speaking Muslim traders with relatives living permanently or temporarily in those countries had trade connections there. Malaya and Thailand, okay? The English tolerated native trade in lungi because it brought them revenue. The cloth became so popular during Dutch rule that the Dutch trademark Pulicat lungi, cloth made in Pulicat, was used for all colored cotton cloth exported from Tamil country. So the trademark became Pulicat lungi. With the departure of the Dutch in 1825, Pulicat changed from a port village to a health resort. Retired English officers acquired land and mansions, and Pulicat was probably a popular summer rendezvous. Casuarina or Casuarina muricata was cultivated as a cash crop primarily by English settlers. I don't know what Casuarina is. However, the official concern of the English as to consolidate their interests in Madras, okay? The official concern of the English was to consolidate their interests in Madras. When the thickly forested hills in the south of Tamil country became accessible, even the little importance Pulicat had as a health resort vanished. In 1895, the lighthouse at Pulicat was rebuilt, and its function was to warn ships away from the dangerous shoals of Pulicat. Some of the mansions in Pulicat continued to be occupied by the Tamil-speaking Muslim traders of Pulicat, and others were owned and used by wealthy Englishmen, Hindus, and Muslims of Madras only as holiday homes. All of the mansions were neglected. In the early 20th century, almost all the Dutch mansions had decayed, and building contractors from Madras came to strip them of their wooden doors and windows. An anthropologist who studied the Tamil-speaking Muslim traders of Pulicat in 1923 wrote, quote, "Many of the fair Muhammadans are traders doing business in Siam, meaning Thailand, Strait settlements, etc., meaning Southeast Asia. Most merchants, after amassing money, return to Pulicat, frequently the homing instinct being very strong in them. With the exception of these merchants who hibernate here after a busy life in Penang and elsewhere, the others can be safely termed drones, quote-unquote drones. The houses built at a time when Pulicat was a flourishing emporium are very pretentious, but unfortunately many of them are in ruin owing to the neglect to repair the blighting effects of biting winds loaded with salt spray. Sea beach के सामने मतलब समुंदर के सामने घर होने से ऐसा ही होगा. Many of the inhabitants are poor and eke out a precarious living by selling stones, timber, pillars, etc. from the ruins of the palatial residences built by their rich forebears." In the case of the Hindu weavers and traders who were uprooted by changes in the 19th century, there was a drastic reduction in the population. but this reduction resulted from migration. The weavers and traders, the Hindu weavers and traders discarded their homes and temples and migrated to other villages and towns. In contrast, the Tamil speaking Muslim traders stayed in Pulicat and declined in population because of malnutrition and sickness. In 1821, Muslims in Pulicat numbered 889, of which about 500 were Tamil speaking Muslim traders. This is pointed out by Moses in 1923. In 1871, out of the total population of Pulicat of 4,903, Muslims numbered 1163, of which the population of traders was probably about 800. In 1921, an anthropologist calculated the latter's population as 500, and in 1971, the population of the traders was 161. In 100 years, less than 5 had taken spouses from outside the village, and none had taken a spouse from a related Muslim community. The Tamil-speaking Muslim traders probably built mosques to the east and north of Pulicat before the Dutch arrived. After the fortification of Pulicat by the Dutch, mosques were built in Pulicat proper, and the mosques built earlier were used primarily by the Tamil-speaking Muslim boat makers. Two large mosques named Padiyapalli or big mosques and Chinnapalli, small mosques, were built, along with smaller places of worship and scripture reading, and the Tamil-speaking Muslim readers were the custodians of the Quranic scriptures in Pulicat and maintained the mosques. The other Muslims, who divided themselves into Rengen and Bebedal groups, built sacred halls known as ujiras for conducting special ceremonies and festivals associated with each group. In the 20th century, most of the buildings built for scripture reading and Arabic education were discarded, but the mosques were maintained by donations and subscriptions from Muslims living elsewhere. The ujiras were maintained in good condition by the Muslims belonging to the two groups, the Rengen and Bebedal. In contrast to the Hindus who did not have a religious head, the Muslims recognized the authority of the Qazi or registrar. Hindus did not have a religious head, guys. Nitin kahan pe hai? The Qazi was an hereditary post held by the members of the trading community. Nitin kahan gaya? Nitin kahan ho? Qazi was an hereditary post held by members of the trading community. The Qazi had the final word in all matters connected with crisis rights, divorce, and property inheritance, and he was often called upon to settle secular disputes upon the Muslims, meaning non-religious disputes. The traders' priestly and administrative authority enabled them to have great prestige vis-a-vis other Muslims despite their impoverished state in the 20th century. Okay, priestly and administrative authority रह गया of the traders क्योंकि पहले इनका एक say था. देखो, same things. In recent times, fishing became the basis of survival. Only a few traders and weavers pursued their occupations. India became an independent republic. Government-aided cooperative societies were established to help the fishermen procure boats and nets. As fish contractors began to export fish and the fishing enterprise expanded, various Muslim, Hindu, and Christian groups got involved in fishing directly or indirectly. Next to fishing, the two major technologies were palm leaf basketry and weaving by handlooms. Weaving was done on a much smaller scale than it had been before the 20th century. Basketry was taken up as a profession by almost every adult female in the households of Tamil-speaking Muslim traders early in the 20th century, and income from the occupation often enabled the traders to subsist. Cooperative societies were established in the last 20 years to help both the Hindu weavers and the Muslim basket makers, and many women have been taught basketry in government-sponsored classes. Now, another subchapter called Labbai Ethnicity in Pulicat. The descendants of the Tamil-speaking Muslim traders of Pulicat conceptualize their experience with reference to what they believe to be the identity of their ancestors in Arabia. इसके साथ genetic truth का कोई संबंध नहीं है. We are discussing what their ideas or conceptualization of society is, what their lenses are. They have self-consciously used the label Labbai as their emblem of identity and have imbued the emblem with their worldview and values, making the emblem a religious as well as a politico-economic symbol. Here to Learn is saying, Dada, I wrote a Bidrohi poem about current situation called Utshabe Fero Ma. If I post it somewhere or publish, how to protect myself? So, if it is not too directly critical of any person in the government, it won't be a problem, okay? Because there's sort of a state sanction in a way of the mass protests that are going on. It's okay that right now the state is allowing these things, okay? If you go beyond just protesting, if you go beyond just saying that yes, what has happened is bad and we want justice, etc., if you go beyond these things and get into the nitty-gritties of the incident that happened, then you are screwed. If it's just rhetorical, then you won't have a problem. These Muslims, the Labbai of Pulicat, have distinguishable physical features. They have in some cases deep blue eyes and their skin color is light brown. The distinguishable physical features separating them from other Muslims and the Hindus may have their loci in quote-unquote Dutch genes rather than a Muslim Middle Eastern quote-unquote racial heritage. The interpretation often offered by Moses is that they are racially Middle Eastern. In contrast to the stigmatized meaning which the label Labbai has in different parts of Tamil country and to its use as a classificatory category of Tamil-speaking Muslims in general, the Muslim traders of Pulicat use the label to signify their social and cultural superiority over other Muslims in Pulicat and to denote their exclusive style of life and religiosity. नितिन असली समय में गायब हो गया. बेला डैनियल भी नहीं है आज. है शायद छुप छुप के देख रहा है. So you see this sentence: Muslim traders of Pulicat use the label to dignify, use the Labbai label to signify their social and cultural superiority over the other Muslims in Pulicat and to denote their exclusive style of life and religiosity. Their beliefs about who the Labbai are constitute a cultural tradition which was written down in Tamil using Arabic script about 50 years ago. The following is a translation of this document. Quote, this is a chronicle which tells about our ancestors and about how they came to establish their settlement in Pulicat. In ancient Medina, there lived a group of Muslim devotees known as khadims, or servants of the Prophet, whose main occupation was to conduct prayers and to tend to the upkeep of the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The khadims possessed supernatural powers and they could perform miracles for those who asked them to intercede with the Prophet. They lived in isolation, away from the people of Medina. Medina was governed by Bathushas, who were the successors of the Imams Hanafi, Banbali, Shafi, and Malik, who had founded separate sects. At the time of the rule of Bathusha Yusuf, the Khadims were persecuted. The Bathusha demanded the Khadims to give tributes to him. As the Khadims declined to meet the demands of the Bathusha, the latter tried to deprive them of the natural powers before he could punish them. He asked them to bring him eggs as gifts and put the eggs in the same basket. Then he asked them to identify the eggs that belonged to each of the Khadims and decreed that they should consume the eggs. The duplicity of the Bathusha was unknown to the Khadims and they committed the sin of consuming food that belonged to another, and as a result, they lost their supernatural powers. When the Bathusha asked them to perform miracles they could not, and convinced that punishing the Khadims would not affect him anymore, the Bathusha decided to deport them. This occurred in the year of Hijri 668. The Khadims and their families were placed in 4 ships. The four ships drifted in four different directions. One reached Malaysia, two reached southeastern coast of the southeastern coast of India, and another reached the southwestern coast of India. The Khadims who reached the southeastern coast identified themselves as Labbais and were distinguished from the natives as Marakabu, or the people of the ship. Those who reached the southwestern coast of India identified themselves as Navitha or Navitha or Navitha, or the new people, and those who arrived in Malaya identified themselves as Hana Haji. Yes, Khadim জুতোর দোকানের সাথে সম্পর্ক আছে. Yes, the Khadim's shoe brand has a relation because it is now owned by a Hindu. It was founded by a Muslim. That's why they named their company Khadim. One of the Labbai settlements was in the Chola kingdom of Tamil Nadu. The settlers flourished in the port town of Kahirpattinam. The king started persecuting them. As a result, the Labbais migrated towards the north of Pulicat. By this time, the Labbais adopted the Tamil language and were engaged in trade. But as they found the place unsuitable, moved south to the Thonirevu harbor of boats section of Pulicat. Long after the Labbais had established themselves in the Thonirevu section of Pulicat, a Dutch ship arrived there, and the captain wanted water. Mustafa Marikayer, who was the head of a prosperous Labbai lineage, received the captain and offered to trade with the Dutch. The Dutch ship called on Thonirevu again, and Mustafa Marikayer promised the captain that he could procure land for the Dutch to build a factory and fort. With his trade connections with the Dutch, Mustafa Marikayer became a very wealthy man, and he went to the king of Arcot with gifts for procuring land for the Dutch. Mustafa Marikayer was successful in getting land, and Pulicat forest was cleared for the building of the Dutch fort in Hijri 772. The Labbais moved their settlement from the Thonirevu section of Pulicat to Pulicat proper. The Dutch provided capital for the Labbais, and the latter prospered. The Labbais prospered. Mosques were built in Pulicat proper and in the Thonirevu section of Pulicat. In Hijri 1091, the mosque in Thonirevu section was renovated. In Hijri 1121, a smaller mosque called Chinnipalli was built, and this was renovated in Hijri 1261. The Labbais belong to the Shafi sect. Okay. The fort in Pulicat was under the Dutch for 143 years. In Hijri 1218, the English captured the fort, but the Dutch returned in Hijri 1233 and ruled for 5 more years before the English dislodged them permanently. Not long ago, when the king of Arcot offered a gift of land for the maintenance of the mosques in Pulicat, the Labbais turned the offer down as they were very wealthy. Wow. Humko nahi chahiye state support. The prince gave the gift to a Muslim in a nearby village, but this gift was stolen from him by a Qazi. End quote. Now we return to what the scholar Jacob Pandian himself is saying. Okay, he's saying all the Muslims in Pulicat belong to the same sectarian tradition, the Sunni Shafi, and speak Tamil, but the descendants of the traders keep themselves isolated as an endogamous group within the Muslim community of the village. This is the crux of this paper. ये एक की टेकअवे है. So all Muslims in Pulicat were Sunni Shafi. But the traders, they created their own caste. They maintained their own endogamous group. They maintained their own caste. We can easily call this caste. यही है लफड़ा, यही है क्रक्स, यही है इनएविटेबिलिटी ऑफ द कास्ट सिस्टम. Hmm. Their houses, which are now in a dilapidated condition, are larger and are in a section of the village where few others live. They have certain unique objects of material culture, such as large water jars and blowguns as a result of their past cultural contacts in Southeastern Asia. The rest are segmented into two non endogamous groups, Bebedal and Rengen, which have yellow and red flags as their respective symbols. No one in Pulicat, quote unquote, knows the origin of the Rengen and or Rengen and Bebedal divisions. Until about 50 years ago, Hindu castes were divided into left hand and right hand categories, each fighting for supremacy over the other. Do they mean Dakshinachara and Vamachara? The Rengen or Anulama and Pratiloma, I don't know what they mean. The Rengen group was affiliated to the left hand category, and the Bebedal group belonged to the right hand category. Although there is no left hand right hand tradition in Pulicat today, Rengen and Bebedal groups hold separate festivals, each claiming precedence over the other. The Labbai do not participate in these festivals and were and are not part of the left and right hand categories. ये तो की टेकअवे है. Rengen and Bebedal Muslims hold separate festivals, and neither of which is attended by Labbais. इतना फास्ट लिखना पड़ रहा है, मेरा हैंडराइटिंग डॉक्टर्स के जैसा हो गया. इंटरेस्टिंग. Conclusion of the paper. Caste and ethnicity. Very important, guys. The caste system is generally distinguished from other systems of stratification with reference to the cultural attributes or conceptualizations that are unique to Hindu civilization. The two most important of which are the hierarchical worldview and the ideology of purity impurity. Occupation, this is the claim at least. That is what he's pointing out. Occupational specialization and endogamy are aspects of these two attributes. For the system to operate, it is considered that two social units which represent the opposite poles of purity and impurity, that is the Brahmin and untouchables, they exist, and these units constitute the points of social reference which the middle ranking caste groups use to associate or dissociate themselves with purity or impurity. That how close I am to the Brahmins and how distant I am from untouchables. From a caste group's point of view, every group is a quote-unquote ritual unit with a specific ceremonial complex and style of life, consumption pattern basically, of its own, similar to that of an ethnic group. However, the ceremonial complex and the style of life are modeled after what is ideologically and ideally expressed in the quote-unquote Hindu hierarchical order of classes or Varna, and the groups that are in between the Brahmin and untouchable groups deem it natural to change their ethnicity or conception of group identity if and when it is perceived that a change is necessary because of changes in their politico-economic situation. Bhosri ke fir se caste mobility depending on politico-economic situation, which gets sanctioned by Brahmins, which is just like today's IAS Babus attestating your documents. In a sense, the middle ranking Hindus are self-conscious of their beliefs and style of life as reflections of or rooted in the socio-politico-economic givens. However, they are constrained by what is believed to be the immutable a priori Varna hierarchy, because Varna is sustained by supra-societal sacerdotal, jo ki sacrifice karte hain, sacerdotal authority, which provides legitimacy for the hierarchical ordering of groups. Thus, the variations in intergroup relationships and the changes in group status must occur within the limits of what can be legitimized by the sacerdotal authority. Fair enough. Caste groups, with the general exception of Brahmin and untouchable groups, tend to exhibit a congruence between ritual and politico-economic statuses. That is, the greater the politico-economic power, the higher the ritual status. Fission occurs when a segment of a particular group perceives itself as more affluent, and the segment may quote-unquote rediscover its new identity and establish itself as ritually superior to the other members of the group. Sometimes an entire group might change its identity in 2 or 3 generations. Wink, wink. Now, what at least in 1978, J. Pandian is saying is that the untouchable groups had no social mobility, which can be debated, but he's saying that Brahmins forever had supremacy, regardless of their political-economic situation. We know from later research, especially from people like Nicholas Dirks, Irfan Habib, etc., that even that was not the case. And Declan Quigley's research. Varna is the Hindu cognitive theory of the social universe, which is that now the argument will go in this conclusion that see why this is different from why this has nothing to do with how Muslims organize themselves into different castes as well. Okay, Varna is the Hindu cognitive theory of the social universe, which is adapted by the people to orient intercaste relationships as well as caste mobility. Most of the sociological or social anthropological research in India, similar to the interrelation of the caste system offered above, derives its theoretical underpinning from Durkheimian social psychology and reference group theory. Therefore, there has been a trend to interpret data using congruence models which establish congruence model, okay, कि थोड़ा similarity, थोड़ा मतलब हाँ this is like that thing, etc. वो comparative things and trying to equate things, okay, which establish a correspondence between ritual and social values. On the one hand, the symbolic representations in the realm of religion and ethnicity are seen as projections of a quote unquote more real politico-economic reality, and on the other hand, religious and ethnic principles are interpreted as the quote unquote true determinants and integrators of the social fabric. It is well known that Durkheim grappled with the problem of relating positivist and rationalist philosophies. Positivist meaning basing something on entirely scientific ways, okay. He sought with the problem of relating positivist and rationalist philosophies, he sought to bridge Lockean empiricism and Kantian formalism in his sociology of knowledge. The above theoretical schema would have us believe that Muslims can function in the Hindu social environment only when they cognitively and motivationally replicate the Hindu worldview and values, which they do not, as will be proven by this, as is being proven by this scholar. As noted in the introduction, people in any socio-cultural system enter into a cultural contract to implement specified roles, and cognitive and motivational sharing is not a prerequisite for mutually predictable relationships. Coexistence of individuals or groups does not entail the replication of each other's motivational and cognitive maps. Okay, coexistence of different groups, meaning coexistence of Hindus and Muslims in this context, does not mean that they will replicate each other's motivations and cognitive understandings of society. The models of interaction that are used by the people permit them to anticipate and orient each other's roles. Okay, this I need to point out and note down as a key takeaway. Okay, beautiful sentence. Coexistence of different groups does not, every time you from now on you hear an argument that Islamic or casteism in Muslims happened because of Hinduism, you have to throw this sentence at them and cite Jacob Pandian of California State University Fullerton campus bhai. Okay, coexistence of different groups um, does not entail does not entail uh, replication of each other's motivational and cognitive maps, their understanding, their worldview of society. Okay, वो मीन किया जा रहा है यहाँ पे by this phrase of motivational and cognitive maps. Awesome. as pointed out by Wallace previously in the introduction as well, in the abstract, in the earlier sections of the paper as well. So the models of interaction, okay, कि हम किस बेसिस पे इंटरेक्शन कर रहे हैं, that are used by the people permit them to anticipate and orient each other's model roles. In Labbai ethnohistory and ethnicity, cultural orientations of the past and of peoplehood, there is no evidence that the Labbai have used the Varna model to establish their quote-unquote ritual status and identity vis-a-vis other Muslim and Hindu groups with reference to social values deriving from their politico-economic status. Brilliant. Fucking awesome research by Jacob Pandian. I have noted this down earlier as well, but again, Labbai caste distinction, like all other castes, have nothing to do with all other caste systems have nothing to do with Varna. Distinction has nothing to do with Varna, as pointed out by Jacob Pandian. Nothing to do with Varna of Hindus. In their orientation, in their distinctions that they created between other Muslims as well as Hindus. In their, let's call it self-differentiation. From other Muslims as well as Hindus. Thank you, Bhupendra, very much. What is the statement? Kindly please tell. That what I just pointed out. Okay. Did you understand now? Because I guess I explained it after you asked the question. Nitin is saying caste has no affiliation to other castes except when there is a Hindu-Muslim riot. On all other occasions, each caste endeavors to segregate itself and to distinguish itself from other castes. Yeah, it's a fair statement. People are not wrong in observing caste. In my view, what is wrong is their religion, which has inculcated this notion of caste. How? Paper after paper is going on showing that caste has nothing to do with religion. Not even, it has nothing to do with Islam even. It has nothing to do with Hinduism even. It has nothing to do with Veda. It has nothing to do with Varna. These are just socio-cultural formations. This socio-cultural formations and I mean socio-cultural contexts of in which people organize themselves. Okay. So the Labbai did not invent a new label for themselves, as many upwardly moving Hindu groups do in order to escape the stigma associated. Okay, the Labbai did not invent a new label for themselves, as many upwardly moving Hindu groups do in order to escape the stigma associated with an earlier label signifying inferior status and stigmatized identity. Okay. The label Labbai, as pointed out in the section on Tamil country and the Labbai, had an inferior connotation in different parts of Tamil country. But despite the Pulicat Labbai's great wealth and association with Dutch political power, तो भाई यहाँ पे रिलीजन कहाँ से आ गया नितिन? देखो, जो लबाई तमिलनाडु में किसी जगह पे लो कास्ट माना जा रहा है, वही लबाई पुलिकट में, स्पेसिफिकली पुलिकट में अपर कास्ट या फिर रेस्पेक्टेड बन जा रहा है बिकॉज ऑफ देयर प्रॉक्सिमिटी टू डच पावर. यही हमेशा होता है. एसोसिएशन विद डच पॉलिटिकल पावर, दे रिटेन्ड द स्टिग्मेटाइज्ड लेबल, क्योंकि उनको कुछ आता जाता भी नहीं है. क्या है? हमको तो पावर मिल गया. The meaning of the label was, however, changed in the politico-economic environment of Pulicat. So you see, it has nothing to do with religion, Islam, Ved, Hinduism, anything, or Varna. In order to understand the label Labbai as an emblem of identity, it is necessary to examine and analyze the meaning of this symbol as it evolved and has been used in the politico-economic environment of Pulicat. So you see, Nitin, this is your answer. This has nothing to do with Islam or Hinduism. This has everything to do with the political and economic environment of Pulicat specifically. As opposed to the ritualized class, Varna, status of Kshatriya, warrior or Vaishya trader, which would have been the Pulicat Labbai's quote-unquote natural point of reference in the Hindu environment if they were influenced and copying Hindus or the Hindu caste system, because of their association with the Dutch who ruled Pulicat and their profession as traders. The Labbai's point of orientation was similar to that of Brahmin Varna, priestly class. ये कैसे हो गया? अगर हिंदुइज्म से इंस्पायर्ड थे, now I'm not talking to Nitin, I'm talking about talking to basically people like Abhay here, who are pointing out these arguments. That see, we were having discussions with you people. That see, yes, they were also declaring themselves to be priestly class. Okay, but if they in fact had copied the Hindu caste system, they would become either the warrior caste because of their proximity to Dutch warriors, or they would become the Vaishya caste, Vaishya-like caste, because of their proximity to Dutch traders. मगर ये बन गए Brahmin like, the priestly class. Okay, ये कैसे हुआ? What has that got to do with having business dealings with the Dutch? The Labbai traced their mythical origins to a group called the Khadims, who were believed to possess great supernatural powers. Even in their economically impoverished condition today, they have continued to maintain their close association with Quranic authority. They send their sons to learn Arabic script and memorize the Quran, much as many Brahmin boys learn Sanskrit and memorize Sanskrit scriptures. ये कैसे हुआ? अगर they were trying to copy the Hindu caste system. They send their sons to learn Arabic script and memorize the Quran, much as many Brahmin boys learn Sanskrit and memorize Sanskrit scriptures. They officiate as Muslim priests, registrars, and commentators. In Pulicat, the label Labbai became synonymous to priest, as every male Labbai, by virtue of his Quranic education, could perform priestly duties that required recitation of scriptures. But the Quranic sacerdotal authority does not accord a superior ritual status for the priesthood and does not subordinate politico-economic dominance as does Hindu sacerdotal authority. Therefore, the Pulicat Labbai cannot be equated with Brahmins. It's only Brahmin-like. It's not Brahmins. Because if it was Brahmin-like, then the people with the subordinate the people with political economic dominance would be subordinated under the people with the ritual dominance, right? ये सब भी नहीं हुआ. इन लोगों का completely अलग explanation, अलग kind of hierarchy बन गया. It is inconceivable that before the arrival of the Dutch, the Tamil-speaking Muslim traders did not constitute a separate endogamous unit among the Muslims living in Pulicat. According to their ethno-history, they were instrumental in establishing the Dutch at Pulicat, and they left the area where a large number of non-Labbai Muslims live today in order to live within the Dutch fortified walls of Pulicat. भाई ये देखो separation कितनी हद तक है, कितना extent तक है. Pulicat Labbais distance themselves from other Muslims to go live in Dutch territories, Dutch fortified walls. लोल ये अनटचेबिलिटी की तरह काहे साउंड कर रहा है? Yeah, that's the craziest statement I've ever heard in the comment section. Yeah, so Donald Trump is worse than. छोड़ो भाई, समझ गए तुम्हारा IQ level. According to their ethno-history, they were instrumental in establishing the Dutch at Pulicat, and they left the area where a large number of non-Labbai Muslims live today in order to live within the Dutch fortified walls of Pulicat. The politico-economic environment of over 200 years was conducive in generating a feeling of separate selfhood and peoplehood. They traded with the Dutch and traveled to Southeast Asia as traders. Thus, despite their indigenous, that is Tamil linguistic base, they could claim alienness more than others and could link alienness with the symbol of Labbai more readily than could the non-trading Labbais. I noted in the section on Tamil country that among the Muslims of Tamil country, religion, language, and alienness operate as emblems of identity, with some groups having all three along with an association made to politico-economic dominance. In the case of Tamil-speaking Muslims, who are generally classified as Labbai and generally have an inferior status, there is no association with politico-economic dominance. But in Pulicat, Because of its politico-economic history, the Tamil speakers were able to link politico-economic dominance with the symbol of Labbai. The Labbai of Pulicat have had a close contact with the Arabic language by learning the Quran, and although they did not speak the language, they used a few Arabic words in their speech, which by itself separated them from other Muslims of Pulicat. The Tamil spoken by the Labbai was, in other words, emblematic. In other words, Labbai speak Tamil. The Labbai of Pulicat speak Tamil in a distinctive manner with a few Arabic words, which simultaneously makes them alien and closer to the sacred, because Quran is written in Arabic. Thus, the ethnicity of the Labbai of Pulicat, which separates them from the other Muslims of Pulicat and imbues the symbol of Labbai with a meaning which is not commonly found in other parts of Tamil country, can be explained as a product of the symbolic association of politico-economic dominance, alienness, religion, and language. This kind of symbolic association does not occur in the Hindu caste orientation. Although the Labbai in general are not associated with the invasion or political control, as in the case of Urdu speakers, the Labbai of Pulicat have had a long and close association with the Dutch, making them similar to the Urdu speakers. Okay, proximity to power. Rather than being a generic term identifying all Tamil-speaking Muslims, the term Labbai became in Pulicat an exclusive, prestigious, emblematic symbol used by only a segment of this population. So, closed status group with endogamous practices and similar consumption patterns. It is possible to write a description of the quote-unquote caste system of Pulicat with the Labbai as a quote-unquote trader caste with a quote-unquote ritual status comparable to that of the Hindu traders, and it is possible to establish the existence of a congruence between the politico-economic and ritual statuses of the Labbai. But to do so would be completely missing the point which I have attempted to address in this paper, which is the Labbai's ritual status is not validated by Brahmin, Kshatriya or Vaishya Varnas. The social value of Labbaihood is not legitimized by Hindu or Islamic authority to sustain a congruence or correspondence between beliefs or lifestyle and politico-economic position. The Labbai know, quote-unquote, know how to function in the Hindu environment, and their social position and behavior make it possible for them to be compared with Hindu caste groups, but the similarity is the product of the operation of different cognitive and motivational principles. The ethnicity of the Labbai is neither a projection of politico-economic realities nor an expression of sacerdotal authority, and therefore cannot be interpreted as an adaptation of the Hindu model of hierarchical opposition between purity and impurity. Okay, so ethnicity of the Labbai is neither a projection of politico-economic realities. Okay, because it's not only politico-economic reality na, politico-economic reality के वजह से causality तो हुआ. See, why is class and status different? Why is class and caste different? Why are status groups dependent or related to economic prowess, but not entirely just economic prowess, right? यही है वो कि पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमिक रियलिटीज के वजह से एक कुछ बोलने का जगह मिल गया, ठीक है, प्रॉक्सिमिटी टू पावर की वजह से. मगर उसके बाद उन्होंने क्या किया? उसके बाद उन्होंने अपना एक वे ऑफ वर्ल्ड व्यू बना लिया, सजा लिया. तो हम एक वर्ल्ड व्यू को एक और वर्ल्ड व्यू के साथ कंपेयर करेंगे इंस्टेड ऑफ गोइंग टू डायरेक्ट कॉजालिटीज में जाए तो भी डिफरेंट पॉलिटिको इकोनॉमिक सिचुएशंस भी है, मगर एक्सप्लेनेशन क्या है, रीजनिंग क्या है, वो है the key difference between the Muslim caste system in India, at least in the case of Labbais of Tamil Nadu, versus the Hindu caste system. So the ethnicity of the Labbai is neither a projection of politico-economic realities nor an expression of sacerdotal authority, and therefore cannot be interpreted as an adaptation of the Hindu model of hierarchical opposition between purity and impurity. But the group's ethnicity and ethnohistory can be interpreted as cognitive or motivational expressions of boundary maintenance. In Pulicat, where symbols of religion, language, and alienness have merged with politico-economic dominance and crystallized into rendering the label Labbai as an emblematic symbol. What a brilliant paper. This was fun. So, thank you for joining the live stream then. I'm very tired now, so I'll go off without discussing any of the comment section. Thank you for the donation, super chat, Bhupendra. So thank you for joining, guys. Bye-bye. Good night.
भीमं गुणाद्रष्टाङ्गरप्रदम् अस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशीं ललज्जयं पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते काली 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 काली